Greetings, lore masters. Tonight, our chronicle covers the dusty, neglected corners of the arcane arts, specifically those spell tomes you likely bought from a shady merchant in the back of a tavern, cast once, and then promptly shoved into the bottom of a chest in Breezeholm, never to be seen again. We are looking at the magic that the archmages of Winterhold turn their noses up at, the spells that seem to offer nothing but wasted magicka and mild disappointment. But, as we drift through the annals of history tonight, we will discover that these so-called useless spells are actually the keys to breaking the very laws of reality itself. Let's be honest, you probably wouldn't survive a trip to Cold Harbour without some serious enchanted gear, so why not use every exploit available to you? So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And, as is our tradition, drop a comment down below telling me where in the world you are listening from, and what time it is on your watch. I always enjoy seeing how far our guild extends. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The Dragonborn stands at the precipice of a dungeon, the air thick with the scent of stagnant water and ancient, decaying bone. Usually this is where the hands flare with the violent orange of a fireball or the crackling violet of a thunderbolt. But tonight, we aren't looking for destruction, we are looking for utility. We begin our count with the Illusion School, a discipline often misunderstood by those who prefer the blunt trauma of a warhammer. Specifically, we look at the spell that sits at the top of our list, arguably the most patronised spell in the game, Clairvoyance. To the uninitiated, Clairvoyance is the spell of the novice, a magical GPS for those who cannot read a map. It manifests as a ribbon of ethereal blue mist, winding along the ground to point you toward your current objective. Most seasoned adventurers scoff at it. Why waste a hand slot on a pathfinding spell when you have a perfectly good compass and a map menu? But to dismiss Clairvoyance is to misunderstand the architecture of the world itself. Consider the vertical labyrinths of Blackreach or the soul-draining fog of the Soul Cairn. In these places, the map is a flat, unhelpful abstraction of a three-dimensional nightmare. The map shows you where you are relative to the destination, but it does not show you the winding ramp hidden behind a Fulmer tent, or the precise jagged rock you can jump over to bypass a gate. Clairvoyance does. It taps directly into the pathfinding data of the universe. When you cast it, you aren't just asking for directions, you're asking the world to reveal the Navmesh, the invisible web of safe ground that the gods laid down when they forged the earth. This brings us to our first game-breaking realization. Clairvoyance reveals the truth of the dungeon layout. Have you ever been stuck in a Nordic ruin, convinced there is a hidden door but you can't find the pull chain? Cast Clairvoyance. If the blue ribbon moves through a solid wall, you know instantly that the wall is an illusion or a movable object. It eliminates the frantic searching, the hugging of walls, the pixel hunting. It streamlines the adventure, turning a confusing hour-long trek into a 5-minute sprint. There is a theory among the more scholarly circles of the community, a bit of a debate really, that clairvoyance isn't actually magic in the traditional sense, but a form of minor prescience, a momentary glimpse into the Elder Scrolls themselves to see where the hero will walk, effectively predestining the path. By following the ribbon, you aren't finding the way, you're collapsing the timeline into the one where you succeed. And let's not forget the economy of magicka. Clairvoyance costs almost nothing to sustain. You can pulse it, cast, release, to keep the visual guide active without draining your reserves, allowing you to navigate treacherous, trap-filled corridors while keeping your magicka regenerating for the inevitable combat. It allows for a state of flow, a seamless movement through the world where you never have to break immersion by pausing the universe to look at a paper map. It keeps you in the moment, in the dark, guided only by that ghostly thread of blue light. Moving down our list to the next cluster of useless magic, we find the influence spells, Courage, Rally, and Call to Arms. On the surface, these seem entirely redundant. Why buff a follower's health and stamina when they're usually just meat shields designed to carry your dragon bones? Or worse, why cast Courage on a random NPC? It seems like a waste of a cooldown. However, the useless label falls away when you realise that Courage is essentially a remote control override for AI behaviour. We all know the frustration of a dragon attacking a town. The blacksmith, the merchant, the quest giver. they all have a tendency to cower or worse, attack the dragon with an iron dagger and die instantly, failing 3 quests in the process. But the mechanics of courage do something specific. They prevent the target from fleeing and grant them a buffer of health. Now you might think preventing them from fleeing is bad. You want them to run away from the dragon. But the game-breaking aspect comes in how it interacts with recovery. When an essential follower or a robust guard takes too much damage, they fall to one knee. This is the bleed-out state. In this state, enemies usually ignore them. However, sometimes the AI glitches, or the enemy continues to aggro, or the follower tries to stand up too early only to be knocked down again, stuck in a loop of incompetence. Hitting them with a rally or courage spell instantly revitalizes their stamina and health pool, often snapping them out of bugged states. Furthermore, there is a darker, more exploitative use for courage. It is the ultimate tool for leveling the illusion skill without ever entering combat. You can walk into the Sleeping Giant Inn in Riverwood, stand in the corner, and cast courage on unsuspecting patrons. Orgnar, Delphine, maybe even the bard Sven. They won't attack you. It's not a hostile spell, it's a buff. The game registers this as a valid combat action because you are applying an effect to an entity, yet the entity perceives it as a kindness, or simply doesn't perceive it at all. You're literally altering their minds, artificially inflating their bravery to dangerous levels just to feel your own magical prowess grow. It's a quiet, invisible grinding method that requires 0 risk. You aren't fighting bandits, you're just making the local populace oddly confident. There is an obscure lore tidbit found in the 2920, the last year of the First Era series, that touches on the nature of illusion magic. It suggests that illusion isn't just tricking the eyes, but altering the physical reality of the target's perception. When you cast courage, you aren't just making someone feel brave, you're physically fortifying them with magicka. This aligns with the in-game mechanic where the spell actually grants physical health and stamina points. It's temporary necromancy of the living spirit. You're injecting power into them. But let's push this further. Let's talk about the interplay of courage and the unarmed build. There is a niche strategy where players utilize a pacifist run, relying entirely on followers. In this scenario, the courage spell tree becomes the primary source of damage output, proxied through your companion. By stacking rally and call to arms, you turn a standard follower like Lydia or Feyendal into a blended vortex of destruction that outpaces your own weapon damage. You become the commander, the voice in their head, driving them into a berserker rage. The game-breaking element here is that you assume 0 aggro. The enemies focus on the threat dealing damage, your follower, while you stand in the shadows, continuously refreshing the buffs, an untouchable god of war who never lifts a blade. It transforms the gameplay loop from an action RPG into a real-time strategy game with a single unit. You're no longer the Dragonborn, you are the manager. We must also address the visual language of these spells. The green and white hues of the illusion buffs are subtle, often lost in the chaos of battle, but in the quiet dark of a dungeon they are significant. Casting Candlelight, another spell often deemed useless by those with gamma turned up, combined with the glowing aura of a rallied ally, creates a beacon. In the pitch black of a Fulmer hive, where the darkness is oppressive and hides Chorus hunters, that glow is not just a buff, it is visibility, it is target acquisition. Consider also the spell Vision of the Tenth Eye. This is a master-level illusion spell, but it is unique in that it is functionally useless for combat. It is a quest-specific toggle used during the ritual spell quest for the College of Winterhold. Most players cast it, find the 4 master books, and never touch it again. It blinds you, distorting your vision with a heavy blur filter to reveal hidden objects. But clever adventurers have found that this visual filter can actually highlight entities through geometry in certain lighting conditions, acting as a primitive, bizarre form of thermal optics. It's a stretch, certainly, but for the dedicated mage, even a quest item spell has utility if you squint hard enough. The core fact here, the one that grounds us in the reality of Skyrim, is that Drevis Nelleran, the illusion master at the college, is practically invisible himself most of the time. He wanders the halls, ignored by his colleagues. It is fitting that he sells the spells that require you to look at the world differently. The game is telling you, the most powerful magic is the magic that changes how you interact with the rules, not just how much fire you can throw. And speaking of throwing things, or rather finding things, we have to touch on the interaction between clairvoyance and the jagged, broken terrain of the mountains. Skyrim is famous for its horse physics, the ability to ride a horse up a nearly vertical cliff. But often, you're on foot. You're trying to reach a quest marker that seems to be on top of a mountain, but the path is unclear. You jump, you slide, you get stuck in a crevice. Clairvoyance is the antidote to mountain climbing frustration. It will rarely point you up a sheer cliff. Instead, it will highlight the one specific polygon of dirt that is flagged as walkable. It shows you the switchback trail obscured by snow. It is the Sherpa of the arcane. So we have a blue ribbon that rewrites your travel plans, and a courage spell that turns bards into tanks and allows for risk-free leveling. These are the spells of the mind, the spells that manipulate the user interface and the AI, rather than the health bars of your enemies. They are subtle, quiet, and easily forgotten. But as the Dragonborn trudges through the snow, leaving Riverwood behind and heading toward the vast plains of Whiterun, the ability to see the true path and the ability to fortify the spirit become far more valuable than a simple spark of electricity. But perhaps you are tired of walking. Perhaps you're tired of the grind for gold, the endless looting of iron daggers and garnets to pay for your training. What if I told you that the next set of useless spells could shatter the economy of Skyrim so thoroughly that money becomes a meaningless concept? What if you could turn the air itself into a weapon, or iron into a retirement fund? The wind howls through the mountain passes, carrying the scent of ozone and metallic transformation. The path ahead is illuminated by the faint blue glow of clairvoyance fading into the distance. The mind is fortified, the will is strong, but the pockets are still light. That is about to change. The fire crackles low in the hearth, casting long dancing shadows against the stone walls of your sanctuary. Outside, the wind might be howling across the tundra, but in here, we are concerned with matters of industry. We leave behind the ethereal ribbons of clairvoyance and the psychological manipulation of courage to dirty our hands with the physical world. We turn our gaze to the school of alteration, the discipline of changing reality to suit your whims. Specifically, we're examining two spells that, on paper, look like parlour tricks, yet in practice possess the power to dismantle the economic and physical laws of Skyrim, transmute mineral ore and telekinesis. Let us begin with the economy. In the harsh province of Skyrim, gold, the septim, is life. It buys the training levels you need, the houses you hoard, and the ebony ingots you require for that legendary armour. Usually acquiring wealth is a grind. You clear a bandit camp, you pick up every rusted iron armour piece, every garnet, every heavy sack of flour, and you slowly waddle back to town, over-encumbered, to sell your junk for a pittance. It is honest work. It is the work of a hero. But there is a spell that mocks this labour. Transmute mineral ore is a spell that many players miss entirely in their first playthrough. It doesn't drop from a dragon priest. It isn't a reward for saving the world. It sits, rather unassumingly, on a wooden table inside Halted Stream Camp, a bandit hideout just north of Whiterun. This camp is ostensibly a mammoth poaching operation, a grim place filled with tusks and blood, but deeper inside they're digging for iron, and the bandit chief, apparently an aspiring wizard of the most pragmatic sort, possessed a tome that turns iron into silver and silver into gold. When you learn this spell, the game changes fundamental genres. You stop being an adventurer and start being a magical industrialist. Iron ore is the cheapest resource in the game. You can buy it from blacksmiths for a handful of coins. You can mine it from the earth in vast quantities. With a flick of your wrist and a shimmer of green alteration magic, that worthless chunk of ferrous rock rearranges its atomic structure to become silver. Cast it again, and it blooms into heavy, lustrous gold. This is not just a useless utility spell, it is an infinite money printer. It bypasses the risk-reward loop entirely. Why delve into a Nordic ruin risking death by Draugr for a chest that might contain 50 gold, when you can stand in the safety of Breezeholm turning a 2-septim rock into a 50-septim rock, ad infinitum? The community has long debated the implications of this. If a simple bandit in a hole near Whiterun had this power, why isn't the economy of Skyrim in hyperinflation? Why is iron still mined at all? The fan theory, and it is a compelling one, suggests that the spell is incredibly taxing on the soul or the mind, something the game mechanics represent simply as a slow magicka, regeneration rate. But in the lore, alteration is about convincing the universe that it is wrong. You're telling the rock, you are not iron, you are gold. To do this repeatedly, on an industrial scale, requires a level of willpower that most hedge wizards simply do not possess. The Dragonborn, however, is a creature of domination. You force the world to be rich for you. This loop feeds directly into the smithing skill. You take your transmuted gold, you smelt it, and you craft gold rings. Thousands of them. You become the Lord of the Rings, not in a Sauron sense, but in a wholesale jewellery sense. You enchant them with Fortify Sneak or Water Breathing using petty soul gems, and suddenly you have levelled alteration, smithing, enchanting and speech, all without leaving your living room. You're wearing Daedric armour not because you conquered oblivion, but because you manipulated the market value of minerals. It is the ultimate white-collar crime in a high fantasy setting, but let us pivot from the creation of matter to the manipulation of it. Let us discuss telekinesis. Available at the adept level of alteration, telekinesis is widely regarded as the most disappointing spell in the game by casual players. You cast it, a red ribbon of energy lashes out, and you can pull an item toward you from a distance. You can grab a potion from a high shelf, or perhaps steal a sweet roll from a guard's table without crouching. It drains magicka at an alarming rate for very little payoff. Why use half your mana bar to grab a coin purse when you could just walk over there? It seems like a novelty, a toy for the wizard who has everything. However, telekinesis has two hidden properties that make it game-breaking. The first is combat potential, but not in the way you think. You aren't using it to disarm opponents. You're using it to weaponize the physics engine. When you hold an object with telekinesis and release the button, the object is thrown. The game calculates damage based on the object's physics weight and velocity. While throwing a cheese wheel is merely insulting, throwing heavier items can stagger enemies. There is a morbid creativity in this. Narratively, killing a bandit plunderer by launching a cabbage at his head at max speeds is the ultimate disrespect. It turns the grim, gritty combat of Skyrim into a slapstick comedy. But the true, useless nature of the spell hides a devastating exploit related to fast travel. This is where we touch on the secret knowledge of the Elder Scrolls community, the exploits that have become canon through usage. The mechanic works like this. You require an item, let's say a bucket or a piece of ore. You drop it on the ground, you cast telekinesis to pick it up, holding the trigger down. While the spell is active and the item is floating in your magical grip, you open your map. You select a destination on the other side of the province, Solitude to Riften, for example. You fast travel. When the game loads you into Riften, the engine performs a calculation. It sees that you started casting telekinesis in Solitude. It sees that you are now in Riften. It calculates the time that would have passed during that journey. Hours, perhaps days of in-game time. It assumes you are holding the trigger, channeling the spell for that entire duration. It dumps tens of thousands of XP into your alteration skill instantly. You arrive in Riften, the bucket clatters to the ground, and you are suddenly a master of alteration. You have gone from level 15 to level 100 in the blink of an eye. You have gained enough character levels to gain 10 perk points. You reset the skill to legendary, and you do it again on the way back. This single, useless spell, designed to fetch books from top shelves, becomes the engine of godhood. It allows you to reach the level cap without fighting a single enemy. It exploits the very way the game measures time and effort. There is an obscure lore tidbit found in the book Breathing Water that discusses the nature of alteration. It suggests that mastery of alteration requires one to understand that the world is merely a possibility, not a certainty. The telekinesis exploit feels like the ultimate realization of this philosophy. You're bending the rules of time and space, the loading screen, to trick the universe into believing you performed a feat of endurance that is humanly impossible. Tolfdir at the college often rambles about the dangers of losing control, but he never warned us about the dangers of fast travelling with a cabbage. Furthermore, telekinesis allows for theft without consequence if used cleverly. You can manipulate items out of an NPC's line of sight before picking them up. You can drag a valuable sword off a merchant's counter, pull it into a dark corner and pocket it. The crime is only registered if you take the item, not if you move it. The guards watch you float a flawless diamond through the air, seemingly unbothered, perhaps assuming you're just redecorating the store until the diamond vanishes into your inventory behind a barrel. There is a distinct tactile pleasure in the sound design of these spells. The low humming drone of the Telekinesis spell, the sharp shing of the Transmute spell converting ore. It becomes a rhythm. Cast, wait, cast, wait. It is hypnotic. It fits the late-night grind perfectly. You aren't panicked, you aren't reacting. You are imposing your will on the static objects of the world. We must also consider the bowling strategy. In high-density areas, or rooms filled with clutter, like the dinner tables in Dragon's Reach, a dual-cast Telekinesis blast doesn't just grab one item. It can create a shockwave of physics interactions. You can turn a banquet hall into a maelstrom of flying plates, goblets, and venison chops. While this deals negligible damage, it disrupts enemy pathfinding. The AI struggles to navigate a floor covered in dynamic obstacles. You are literally throwing the environment at them, creating chaos to mask your escape or your next attack. So we have a spell that turns dirt into retirement funds, and a spell that turns a bucket into a pathway to infinite power. These are the tools of the mage who has transcended the need for traditional adventuring. Why raid a tomb when you can manipulate the market? Why train with a sword when you can meditate on a floating basket across the breadth of the continent? The Dragonborn stands in the market of Riften. Their pockets are heavy with gold rings, their mind expanded by the impossible feat of telekinetic endurance they just performed. The guards look on with suspicion, but they do nothing. After all, no crime was committed, just a bit of alteration. But as your pockets fill with gold and your skills skyrocket, you realise that offence and defence are still necessary. You cannot pay a dragon to leave you alone, usually, and you cannot throw a sweet roll at a giant and expect to live. You need protection, and for that we must look at the most ridiculed defensive spell in the game, a spell that breaks like glass under pressure, or so they say. We're moving from the forge to the battlefield, to examine a shield made of light that holds a secret capable of nullifying the breath of a god. The gold coins clink softly in your inventory, a comforting weight earned through magical tax evasion. But as the Dragonborn steps out from the safety of the city walls, the harsh reality of Skyrim asserts itself. A shadow passes overhead, vast, winged, and ancient. A roar shakes the snow from the pine trees. It is a dragon, and it is opening its maw to unleash a torrent of fire that could melt the armour you just spent hours crafting. Instinct tells you to run, or to raise a heavy shield of steel, but we are mages of the obscure tonight. We do not cower behind metal. We raise a fragile, shimmering sheet of blue light known as the Ward. Specifically, the Lesser Ward. The Restoration School is often relegated to the role of a glorified first aid kit. Healing and fast healing are the staples, the panic buttons you press when your health bar flashes red. Wards, however, are the ugly stepchildren of the school. A lesser ward costs a continuous stream of magicka to maintain, it has a delay before it fully charges, and it shatters if it takes too much damage, staggering you in the process. In the frenetic chaos of combat, who has time to hold up a magic hand that might break? Most players try it once, get their guard broken by a bandit's power attack, and swear it off forever. But here is the secret that turns this useless spell into a game breaker. Wards do not just block damage, they grant armor rating, and more importantly, they block effects. The mechanics of Dragon Breath in Skyrim are unique. Whether it is fire or frost, the breath attack is essentially a rapid-fire stream of low-damage projectiles and status effects. When a dragon breathes fire, it isn't hitting you with one massive 500 damage fireball, it is hitting you with dozens of 10 damage particles every second. A physical shield blocks some of this, but elemental damage often bleeds through. The Lesser Ward, the weakest, cheapest version of the spell, negates this entirely. The moment the ward is up, even if it hasn't fully charged to its maximum point value, it acts as a binary wall against magical effects. Because the individual hits of the Dragon Breath are low damage, they often fail to break the ward's threshold instantly. The ward absorbs the shout, negating the burning status effect, the damage, and the stagger. You can stand directly in the face of a legendary dragon, holding up a novice-level spell that cost a pittance of magicka, and watch as the flames wash harmlessly around you like water off a duck's back. You are, for that moment, invincible against the voice of a god. This applies to more than just dragons. Consider the Draugr Deathlords and their relentless use of unrelenting force. We have all been there. You are fighting on a narrow ledge, a Deathlord shouts Fusro Da, and you are ragdolled off a cliff, watching your character bounce down the mountain for 30 seconds. It is funny the first time, infuriating the 10th. A lesser ward blocks, unrelenting force, completely. The shout hits the ward flares, and you stand your ground, unmoved. The mighty voice that can sunder castle walls cannot penetrate a novice defensive spell. This interaction creates a paradox. The lesser ward is arguably better than the greater ward for this specific purpose. The greater ward costs significantly more magicka to sustain. If your goal is simply to block shouts and breath attacks, the lesser ward is the efficient choice. It is the economy shield. You're using a paper umbrella to stop a hurricane, and somehow it works. But let's deepen the lore. Why does this work? In the in-game book, The Exodus, there is a discussion about the nature of restoration magic. It is not just about healing flesh, it is about restoring order. A ward isn't a wall, it is an assertion of reality. It is the mage saying, magic does not exist here. By negating the magical nature of the shout, the physical force dissipates. You are essentially cancelling the enemy's spellcasting privileges within a 2-foot radius of your hand. Now, we combine this with the spell absorption mechanic to truly break the game. This is where the Atronach stone or the Atronach perk in the alteration tree comes into play. Spell absorption gives you a percentage chance to absorb the magicka of an incoming spell instead of taking damage. There is a fascinating, somewhat broken interaction here. Wards count as a sustained spell. When you are holding a ward and you get hit by a magical attack, if your spell absorption triggers, you don't just negate the damage, you refill your own magicka bar. You can use the enemy's attack to power the very shield that is blocking it. It creates a closed loop of energy. The dragon breathes fire on you, which refills your magicka, allowing you to hold the ward forever. You become a magical battery, feeding off the aggression of your enemies. However, there is a darker side to spell absorption that fits our theme of useless interactions. Sometimes, high spell absorption causes your own conjuration spells to fail. You try to summon a Dremora Lord, and your body absorbs the spell, refunding the magicka, but leaving you with no ally. It is a hilarious oversight in the game's logic. You're so resistant to magic that you resist your own help, but with a ward, you are controlling exactly what you absorb. Let's talk about Colette Morantz, the restoration master at the college. She's constantly complaining that she doesn't get the respect she deserves. Restoration is a perfectly valid school of magic, she insists, her voice tinged with desperation, and she's right. The fact that a novice restoration spell can nullify the primary offensive tool of the game's main antagonist validates her entire career. It's a subtle nod from the developers. The loud, flashy destruction mage gets all the glory, but the quiet restoration mage is the one who actually survives the boss fight. There is also a tactical application for wards in trap suppression. Many dungeons are filled with magical runes, fire, frost, lightning painted on the floor. Stepping on them means explosion and death. Disarming them usually requires finding the trigger or shooting them from a distance, but you can just walk through them with a ward up. The ward triggers the rune, absorbs the damage, and you keep walking. You become a minesweeper. It allows for an aggressive, relentless pace through dungeons. You don't check for traps, you just bulldoze through them with a shield of light. We must acknowledge the stamina management aspect as well. Using a physical shield drains stamina when you block. Using a ward drains magicka. This allows for hybrid tanking. When your stamina is low, switch to wards. When your magicka is low, switch to a shield. By cycling between physical and magical defense, you can maintain a defensive posture indefinitely, never opening yourself up to a killing blow. And finally, let's touch on the visual storytelling of the ward. It is a translucent, shimmering barrier. In first-person view, it distorts the world behind it. It muffles the sound of the battle slightly, creating a sensation of being in a bubble. There is an ASMR quality to the hum of the ward, a steady, low-frequency vibration that signifies safety. In the midst of a chaotic battle with Draegr shouting and arrows flying, that hum is your anchor. It is the sound of control. So the next time a dragon descends, do not panic. Do not scramble for a potion. Just raise your hand. Let the blue light shimmer into existence. Watch the fire wash over you and smile, knowing that the most useless spell in your arsenal has just tamed the apocalypse. But defense is only half the battle. Eventually you must strike back, And while we could throw lightning bolts like everyone else, surely there is a more creative way to dispatch our foes, a way that involves turning the dungeon floor itself into a minefield before the enemy even knows we are there. We leave the reactive safety of the ward and move to the proactive, calculated malice of the rune. The dragon has flown off, frustrated by your impenetrable wall of light, or perhaps it lies dead, its soul absorbed into your very being. The adrenaline fades, and the silence of the dungeon returns. We descend deeper into the crypt, the air growing colder, the shadows stretching longer. Now we shift our mindset from the reactive defender to the calculating architect of doom. We are talking about the runes, fire, frost, and shock, spells that turn the environment itself into a weapon. To the impatient mage, runes are useless. They cost a staggering amount of magicka to cast. They have a limited range and you can only place one at a time, unless you have the Master of the Mind perk deep in the destruction tree, and even then the limit is restrictive. Why spend 3 seconds placing a trap on the floor when you could just dual cast Incinerate and be done with it? Runes are slow, they are methodical, they are the tools of the hunter, not the warrior. But this slowness is exactly where their game-breaking potential lies. Runes allow you to bank damage before combat even begins. Imagine you are sneaking through a Nordic ruin. You hear the heavy, restless breathing of a Draugr Deathlord in the next room. He hasn't seen you. In a standard engagement, you would open the door, cast a spell, and the fight would be on. He would shout, you would dodge, chaos would ensue. With runes, the engagement is over before the door even opens. You cast a fire rune at the threshold. You wait a moment for your magicka to regenerate. You cast another one slightly further back, if you have the perks. You drink a potion of Fortify Destruction. You're stacking the deck. When you finally trigger the enemy, perhaps with an arrow or a simple shout, they charge mindlessly toward you. They hit the rune. Boom. The damage calculation for runes is deceptively high because it hits the legs, so to speak, and often bypasses block mechanics. But the true power is the stagger. A rune explosion almost always staggers the enemy. This interrupts their charge, their shout, or their power attack. It buys you time to cast your next spell. This brings us to the rune stacking exploit, or rather, a feature of the engine that feels like an exploit. If you have the Asidal's Ring of Arcana from the Dragonborn DLC, you gain access to the spells Ignite and Freeze, but let's focus on the rune aspect. The DLC also introduces the spell Frenzy Rune and Poison Rune, Restoration. While you are generally limited to one elemental rune, you can often layer different types of runes. A Poison Rune and a Fire Rune can occupy the same hallway. The enemy runs into a cocktail of suffering, instant explosion damage plus a lingering damage over time poison effect that ticks away their health while they are staggering. There is a sadistic joy in this setup. You are playing tower defense in an RPG. You are the dungeon master, setting up the encounter to ensure the hero, who is actually the villain in this scenario, fails. Let's discuss the wall banging technique. Runes have a blast radius. Physics in Skyrim does not always respect walls. If an enemy is locked behind a gate or a door that you cannot open, or if they are stuck in a glitchy piece of geometry, you can cast a rune on the wall or floor adjacent to them. The explosion will clip through the texture, damaging the enemy on the other side. It is the ultimate solution to the enemy stuck in the wall bug, or simply a way to kill a boss without ever entering the room. You're essentially using C4 to breach and clear, minus the breach. And we must mention the funniest interaction in the rune playbook, the ragdoll launch. When a rune detonates, it applies a physics impulse. If an enemy is low on health, or if the rune is placed on a slope, the explosion can launch the body with comedic velocity. We have all seen a bandit step on a rune and suddenly become a satellite. While this doesn't add damage, it adds a layer of control. If you fight on a mountaintop or a bridge, a well-placed shock rune doesn't just damage the enemy, it throws them off the ledge. Gravity does the rest of the work. Infinite damage is the best kind of damage. There is a lore tidbit here regarding the destruction magic of the Cyrodiilic Mages Guild versus the College of Winterhold. The guild often frowned upon trap magic as cowardly, preferring direct confrontation. But the Nords of Skyrim, despite their hatred of magic, respect the hunt. A rune is a trap. It is a magical bear trap. In a way, the rune mage is closer to the traditional Nordic hunter than the fireball-flinging wizard. You're stalking your prey, setting the snare, and waiting. Consider also the sound design. The rune emits a distinct high-pitched hum when active, and it glows with a pulsing light. In the dark, it acts as a lantern, but the explosion, it is guttural, a deep bass-heavy thud that shakes the screen. It feels impactful. It feels heavy. Now, let's talk about the synergy with the throw voice shout. This is a shout often considered useless. It just makes a sound to distract enemies. But combine it with runes, and you have a puppet show of death. You place a rune in a dark corner, you hide. You use throw voice to project an insult. "Hey, Melon Nose," directly onto the rune. The curious bandit walks over to investigate the voice. Kaboom! You haven't been seen. You haven't been heard. You're a ghost that kills with curiosity. This strategy completely trivializes boss fights against melee-heavy enemies like the Ebony Warrior or Karstag. You can retreat, placing runes in your wake. They are forced to chase you through a minefield. You are kiting them, but instead of shooting arrows, you are leaving behind pockets of concentrated destruction. It turns the fight into a game of tag where it explodes. There is a fan debate about whether runes are actually physical inscriptions or merely concentrated magicka held in stasis. The fact that you can cast them on water, where they float, or on vertical surfaces suggests they are tethers to a magical plane, anchored to a point in space rather than the surface itself. This anchor theory explains why they don't move with doors or rotating pillars. They are fixed in the coordinates of the universe, not the object. And let's not forget the Ash rune from the Dragonborn DLC. This spell doesn't deal damage. It encases the target in hardened ash for 30 seconds. It takes the enemy out of the fight entirely. It is a pause button for combat. In a room with 3 Deathlords, you Ash rune 2 of them. Now it is a fair 1v1 fight. When you're done, the ash crumbles and you fight the next one. It is crowd control par excellence disguised as a trap. The preparation is key. The rune mage is never surprised. They enter a room, scan the geometry, identify the choke points, the doorways, the narrow bridges, the staircases, and they lay their groundwork. It transforms the chaotic, flailing combat of Skyrim into a puzzle game. How can I make the enemy walk exactly here? But what if you want to outsource the exploding? What if you don't want to wait for the enemy to come to you? What if you want to send a delivery mechanism of fire and teeth directly to their doorstep? We leave the stationary world of runes and look to the Conjuration School, specifically to a summons that is not meant to last, a creature born to die, and perhaps the most chaotic good boy in all of Tamriel. The smoke from the rune traps clears, leaving only charred stone and the quiet satisfaction of a plan well executed. But sometimes the enemy refuses to walk into your trap. Sometimes they are dug in behind cover, peppering you with arrows, or they are simply too far away to lure. In these moments you need a projectile. But why use a fireball when you can use a wolf? Specifically, a wolf made of fire that explodes on impact. We're talking about the Flaming Familiar. This spell is a reward for completing the quest A Scroll for Ansgar in Highgate Ruins. It is a unique conjuration spell that summons a Flaming Familiar, a glowing spectral wolf that behaves like a homing missile. It costs a surprisingly low amount of magicka, has a decent range, and upon reaching its target, or after a short duration, it detonates. Most players look at the stats and scoff. The explosion damage isn't massive compared to a dual-cast fireball. The wolf is fragile. A single arrow can pop it before it reaches the enemy. It seems like a novelty spell, a gimmick. Why summon a wolf that dies in 5 seconds when you could summon a Dremora Lord that lasts for 60? The answer lies in the AI behaviour and the aggro mechanics. The Flaming Familiar is not a combatant. It is a distraction that bites back. When you cast a fireball, the enemy AI registers you as the source of the damage. They look at you, they charge you. When you cast a Flaming Familiar, the game registers a new entity entering the battlefield. The enemy AI switches targets. They see a wolf charging them. They stop looking for the mage in the shadows and start swinging at the wolf. This momentary distraction is invaluable. It breaks their focus. And then, the wolf explodes. The explosion deals area of effect fire damage. But unlike a fireball, which explodes on impact with the first thing it hits, the familiar runs into the middle of the group before detonating. It is a smart bomb. It seeks the density of the crowd. It runs behind the shield of the blocking bandit. It chases the archer who is backing away. It has pathfinding. This changes the geometry of the fight. You can cast the familiar around corners. You don't need line of sight to the enemy. You just need to spawn the wolf near them. The wolf will sniff them out. It is fire and forget in the most literal sense. You're essentially throwing grenades with legs. There is a frantic, chaotic energy to using this spell. The cooldown is short. The magicka cost is low. You can spam it. Summon, run, boom, summon, run, boom. You become a pack leader of suicide bombers. The battlefield fills with the howling of spectral wolves and the constant thud of explosions. It overwhelms the enemy AI. They don't know whether to attack you or the constant stream of explosive dogs. But the true game-breaking potential comes when you combine this with the Augmented Flames perks in the Destruction tree, which boost the explosion damage, and the Twin Souls perk in Conjuration. With Twin Souls, you can have 2 familiars active at once. You're sending them in waves. There is also a hilarious synergy with runes. If you cast a flaming familiar on top of a rune you placed earlier, and an enemy is nearby, the familiar might trigger the rune if the game logic glitches or if the splash damage overlaps, creating a cascade of failure for the bad guys. Let's look at an obscure lore tidbit. The spell tome is found in Highgate Ruins, a place associated with Dragon Priest Voken. Voken's name translates to shadow in the dragon language. It is fitting that the spell found in his domain is a creature of ephemeral nature, a shadow of a wolf wreathed in flame. It suggests that this magic is ancient, perhaps a precursor to the more stable Atronach summons. It is raw, unrefined magic. It is the magical equivalent of a Molotov cocktail. The Kamikaze dog strategy is particularly effective against mages. Enemy mages in Skyrim usually put up a ward when they see a spell incoming. A fireball hits the ward and is absorbed, but the flaming familiar is a creature. The mage's AI doesn't know to block a creature with a ward until it attacks, but the attack is an explosion. The wolf runs right through the ward, or gets close enough, and detonates, bypassing the magical defense. It is the hard counter to the magical turtle. Furthermore, the familiar can be used to check rooms. Unsure if there are enemies ahead? Cast the familiar into the dark corridor. If it runs forward aggressively, you have enemies. If it stands there looking confused and then explodes, you are safe. It is a dowsing rod for danger. And let's not forget the psychological aspect. For the player, not the AI. There is something deeply satisfying about the useless nature of the spell. It feels scrappy. It feels like hedge magic. You aren't a polished wizard from the college. You're a wild mage throwing burning dogs at people. It adds a layer of roleplay grit to your character. In terms of fan theories, there is a debate about where the familiar comes from. Is it a Daedra? A spirit of Nirn? The spell description says familiar, which usually implies a spirit bound to the caster. Unlike Atronachs, which are pulled from oblivion, the familiar might be a manifestation of the caster's own will shaped into a wolf. This would explain why it is so unstable. It is literally a projection of your anger, given form and set loose to burn. The visual is striking. The wolf is transparent, glowing with an inner fire, leaving a trail of embers as it runs. In the dark of a dungeon, it is a terrifying sight. And the sound, the spectral howl followed by the sharp crack of the explosion, becomes the rhythm of your conquest. So, we have turned navigation into a cheat code, money into a meaningless number, shields into batteries, traps into minefields, and now, wolves into grenades. But all of these require you to know where the enemy is. What if you could strip away the walls entirely? What if you could see the beating hearts of your enemies through stone and iron, making ambush impossible? We turn our eyes to the ultimate tool of the paranoid mage, detect life. The echoes of the exploding wolf fade into the damp stone of the dungeon walls. The dust settles. The immediate threat is gone, reduced to ash and bad memories. But as the Dragonborn wipes the soot from their armour, a nagging question remains. What is behind the next door? Is it a chest filled with loot? Is it a bandit chief sharpening an axe? Or is it an empty room that will waste 5 minutes of cautious crouching? We leave the chaotic, fiery noise of the flaming familiar and slip into the silent, monochromatic world of information warfare. We are looking at the alteration spell that turns the fantasy RPG into a tactical espionage thriller. Detect life. To the novice mage, detect life is a disappointment. It is a toggle spell that drains magicka rapidly, turns the beautiful graphics of Skyrim into a washed-out grey blur, and doesn't actually hurt anyone. You cast it, you see some glowing blobs, and you run out of mana. Most players acquire the tome as a quest reward for Tolfdir's infiltration of Treva's Watch, a quest literally designed to teach you the spell, and then immediately forget it exists. It feels passive. In a game about shouting dragons out of the sky, simply seeing things feels underwhelming, but this assessment ignores the most powerful weapon in any war: intelligence. Detect Life is essentially wall hacks, codified into the game mechanics. It grants the player X-ray vision. Consider the Stealth Archer, the most popular build in the history of the game. The Stealth Archer relies on the element of surprise, but how can you be surprised if you know the exact position, facing direction, and patrol path of every enemy in the dungeon before you even open the door? Detect Life removes the guesswork from stealth. You don't have to peek around the corner and risk detection. You stand safely behind a solid stone wall, hold down the casting trigger and watch the red aura of the bandit patrol walk by. You wait for the aura to turn its back. Then you move. It trivializes the dungeon crawl. The tension of the unknown evokes fear, but Detect Life evaporates that mist. You know that the room ahead contains exactly 3 enemies: one sleeping, stationary aura, one sitting, stationary aura, and one patrolling. You can plan your attack with surgical precision. You become a SWAT team of one. You are playing Metal Gear Solid while everyone else is playing Dungeons & Dragons. This utility extends to the most frustrating mechanic in the open world. You cannot fast travel when enemies are nearby. We have all been there. You're standing in the middle of a pristine field in Whiterun Hold. The music is calm. You open the map to travel to Riften. The game says no. Somewhere, hidden in the tall grass or behind a rock, a slaughterfish or a mudcrab is technically aggressive toward you. Without Detect Life, you run around in circles, swinging your sword at bushes, frustrated and confused. With Detect Life, the offender glows a bright, angry red. You walk over, crush the mudcrab, and fast travel away. It saves you from the tyranny of the unseen nuisance. But let's talk about the economy of looting. After a massive battle in high grass or deep snow, bodies tend to disappear. Physics glitches might send a corpse sliding down a hill. If that corpse was holding a key or an ebony shield, losing it is a tragedy. Detect Life highlights corpses, depending on the version and mods. Though technically, Detect Dead covers the inanimate, Detect Life often catches the recently deceased, or simply helps you navigate to the living who have loot to steal. More importantly, it highlights the pockets you haven't picked yet. This leads us to the City Sweeper strategy. If you are a thief, Detect Life is your primary tool. You stand in the centre of the marketplace. You cast the spell. You instantly see who is a guard. Red, if you have a bounty, or simply distinct by equipment loadout visually. And who is a civilian? You can see through the walls of the Jarl's palace to know if the noble is in their bedroom or the main hall. You never break into a house blindly. You know exactly who is home. It maximizes your gold per hour ratio by ensuring you only commit crimes when the coast is literally clear. There is a fascinating lore implication here, tied to the history of magic in Tamriel. In previous games like Oblivion, Detect Life was part of the mysticism school. Mysticism was the school of manipulating magicka itself, dealing with souls and the unseen forces of the universe. In Skyrim, mysticism was abolished, or simply absorbed, by the other schools. Detect Life was moved to Alteration. This shift implies that the mages of the Fourth Era no longer view life detection as a spiritual communion with the animus, but rather as a physical alteration of the caster's optic nerves to perceive biological heat or magicka flow. You aren't sensing their souls, you're detecting their biology. This shift explains the visual filter. The world goes grey. The colour, the life, is drained from the environment, leaving only the living entities glowing. Friendly targets glow blue, hostile targets glow red. This brings up a community debate. Is the colour coding a gameplay abstraction, or is the spell actually reading the intent of the target? Does the spell reach into the mind of the bandit and see hatred, translating that to red? If you cast it on a betrayer, someone who is currently friendly but script-bound to attack you later, like Mercer Frey, they often show as friendly until the moment of betrayal. This suggests the spell is limited to the target's current conscious state. It cannot predict the future, it can only read the present adrenaline levels. The sound design of Detect Life is also worth noting for our late-night journey. It features a rhythmic, pulsing sound, like a heartbeat, but metallic and magical. Thump, 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 thump. It is hypnotic. It creates a sense of intimacy with the target. You're hearing their existence. In a dark room, wearing headphones, this soundscape creates a feeling of predatory dominance. You are the hunter in the dark. Let's not overlook the leveling exploit. Because Detect Life gives XP based on the number of targets detected, it is the fastest way to power level alteration without combat. You don't go to a dungeon. You go to the Blue Palace in Solitude or the market in Riften during peak hours. You stand in the middle of the crowd and hold the button. The game registers that you are detecting 20 people at once. Your skill bar flies up. You are literally gaining magical power by people watching. It is the magical equivalent of sitting on a park bench and judging passers-by. Except it eventually grants you the power to paralyze them. There is also the Pacifist Run application. If you're trying to complete the game with 0 kills, a challenge run popular among masochistic players, Detect Life is mandatory. It allows you to navigate entire dungeons without engaging. You wait for the patrol to turn, you slip past, you're a ghost. The game becomes a puzzle of avoidance. Without this spell, the Pacifist Run is a game of save scumming. With it, it is a game of skill. However, the spell has a useless quirk that often catches players off guard. It does not detect the undead, Daedra, or dwarven automatons. This limitation is actually a horror mechanic in disguise. You get used to the safety of the spell. You enter a Dwemer ruin, you cast Detect Life. The screen is grey, no red blobs. Safe, you think. You walk around the corner and are immediately decapitated by a centurion. The silence of the spell in these areas is deafening. It forces you to rely on your eyes and ears again, creating a sharp contrast that heightens the tension. The absence of information becomes information itself. If Detect Life shows nothing, but you hear metal clanking, run! And let's be honest, checking the Detect Life view is the only way to find your follower after they've gotten stuck on a rock 3 rooms back. Lydia isn't dead. She's just jogging in place against a wall, glowing a calm, friendly blue, waiting for you to come retrieve her. So, we have a spell that lets us see the future actions of our enemies, turning us into omniscient spectral assassins. We have stripped the enemy of their element of surprise, but seeing them is one thing. What if we want to control how they feel? What if we want to take that bandit who is currently glowing red with aggression and turn that red into a pale, trembling white? We move from the passive observation of alteration to the active manipulation of illusion, to a mechanic that can render the most powerful enemies in the game utterly helpless. We leave the monochromatic safety of Detect Life, where the world is reduced to a binary of friend or foe, and step back into the visceral, rotting reality of the crypt. We have seen the enemy. We know they are there. But now we are faced with a Draugr Deathlord, a towering slab of withered muscle clad in ebony armour, armed with a bow that shoots arrows the size of javelins, and possessing a voice that can throw us through a stone wall. The instinct is to fight, to clash steel against steel. But tonight, we are not warriors. We are terrifyingly efficient cowards. We are exploring the mechanics of fear and the Restoration School's most annoying spell, Turn Undead. To the average player, the Turn Undead spell family, ranging from the humble Turn Lesser Undead to the mighty Bane of the Undead, is actively detrimental to gameplay. The mechanic is simple. You hit an undead enemy with the spell, and they flee in terror for 30 seconds. On paper, this sounds good. In practice, it is a nuisance. You cast the spell, the Draugr runs away, and you have to chase it. You spend the next minute playing a high-stakes game of tag, running through a dungeon, potentially waking up more enemies, just to strike the fleeing coward in the back. It feels inefficient. Why make the enemy run when you want them dead? But the useless label evaporates when you understand the hidden stagger mechanic and the concept of the stun lock. When a Turn Undead spell connects, it doesn't just apply a flee state, it applies a heavy stagger animation. The Draugr reels back, hands raising to shield its face, the ancient magic burning its necrotic bond. This animation takes about 2 to 3 seconds to complete before the AI can actually turn around and start running. Here is the exploit. The casting time for a basic Turn Undead spell is roughly 1 second. Do you see the math? You cast. The Deathlord staggers. While he is staggering, you cast again. The new spell hits just as the animation finishes, refreshing the fear and triggering a new stagger. You are not making him run. You are trapping him in a perpetual state of flinching. This works on the highest level enemies in the game. A Draugr Deathlord, capable of two-shotting you with an ebony greatsword, becomes helpless. He cannot shout, he cannot swing, he cannot move. He stands there, rocking back and forth, bathed in the sizzling blue light of restoration magic, while you or your follower leisurely chip away at his health pool. You have turned a boss fight into a training dummy session. This strategy becomes even more broken when you factor in the Necromage perk in the restoration tree. This perk makes all spells more effective against the undead. It raises the level cap of the creatures you can affect. Suddenly, that Turn Lesser Undead spell you bought for a handful of gold at level 5 is staggering endgame bosses. You're using a water pistol to stop a tank, and it is working. There is a distinct psychological satisfaction in this. Usually the Draugr are the ones applying pressure. They are relentless, they are numerous, and they are loud. Using fear mechanics turns the tables. You are the predator, they are the prey. When you corner a Deathlord against a wall and spam Turn Undead, the AI breaks. It tries to run, but has nowhere to go. It just cowers. The mighty ancient Nord warrior, who once served dragons, is reduced to a shivering mess in the corner. It strips the enemy of their dignity before it strips them of their life. Let's expand this to the illusion school and the fear spell for living targets. The mechanics are identical. A bandit chief charging you with a warhammer is terrifying. A bandit chief running away from you screaming for mercy is a target. But the true utility of fear lies in resetting a fight. Imagine you are overwhelmed. You have pulled too many mobs. Your health is low. You cast a dual-casted fear spell with the aspect of terror perk. The room empties. The bandits scatter like cockroaches. This gives you 30 seconds of peace. You can heal. You can reapply your buffs. You can loot the chest while they are running away. You control the tempo of the battle. You decide when the fighting resumes. And if you are feeling particularly cruel, you can chase them down one by one, eliminating them in isolation rather than facing them as a group. Divide and conquer, literally. There is a fascinating obscure lore tidbit regarding the nature of the turn mechanic. In the notes on the phylactery of Hevnorak, and various texts by the Vigilance of Stendar, it is implied that the turn spell is not inducing psychological fear. Zombies don't have psychology. Instead, it is momentarily severing the necromantic binding that holds the soul to the corpse. The fear we see is the soul realizing it is trapped in a rotting shell and trying to escape the immediate vicinity of the holy energy that is disrupting its bond. You are inflicting existential dysmorphia on them. The stagger is the shock of the soul trying to rip free and failing. It adds a layer of grim darkness to what looks like a silly running animation. We must also address the Circle of Protection and Guardian Circle spells. These are stationary runes that apply the turn effect to any undead that enters. If you stand inside a Guardian Circle, melee undead cannot touch you. They run in, get feared, run out, turn around, run back in, and get feared again. They bounce off the invisible walls of your faith. It creates a sanctuary zone where you are functionally immortal against the Draugr hordes. You can stand in the middle of the final room of a dungeon, surrounded by 20 enemies, and simply read a book while they run in circles around you, unable to breach the perimeter. Fan communities often debate the morality of these spells. Is it more humane to incinerate a bandit instantly with a fireball, or to fill their mind with such overwhelming magical terror that they abandon their friends and flee into the wilderness, likely to be eaten by wolves or freeze to death? The fear mage is not a destroyer. They are a tormentor. They weaponize the instinct for self-preservation. There is a specific interaction with hazard traps that makes fear game-breaking. Dungeons are full of swinging blades, pressure plates, and falling rocks. Enemies usually navigate these with some success. But a feared enemy loses their pathfinding caution. They run blindly. If you cast fear on a group of bandits standing near a swinging blade trap, they will often run directly into the blades in their panic. You aren't killing them, you're convincing them to commit suicide by environment. It is the ultimate hands-clean kill, and let's not forget the synergy with the slow time shout. If you shout Tid Cloul and then cast fear, the enemies flee in slow motion. It is a cinematic masterpiece. You can walk among them, a spectre of death, watching their terrified expressions distort as they try to run through molasses. It allows you to line up the perfect headshot, or simply admire the chaos you have created. The sound design of the Turn Undead spell is unique. It has a searing sound, like a hot iron hitting wet leather. It is the sound of purification. Contrast this with the fear spell in Illusion, which sounds like a distorted scream or a nightmare manifest. The audio cues tell you exactly what is happening. One is holy fire burning the corruption, the other is a psychic attack on the mind. But perhaps you feel bad about making people scream. Perhaps you don't want to drive your enemies away. Maybe you want them to stay. Maybe you want them to fight each other. What if you could turn that crowded room of bandits not into a fleeing herd, but into a gladiatorial arena where you are the only spectator? We move from the mechanics of repulsion to the mechanics of chaos. We turn to the spells that rewrite the social contract of Skyrim: fury and calm. The echoes of terrified screams fade into the distance, and the dust settles in the dungeon. But let us leave the damp, claustrophobic ruins for a moment and step out into the sunlight. Let us walk the cobbled streets of Solitude or the bustling markets of Whiterun. Here, the laws of the game are different. You cannot simply fireball your way through a disagreement with a merchant, nor can you shout a jarl off his throne without incurring a massive bounty and the wrath of every guard in the hold. But the master of useless spells knows that there is a way to commit murder in broad daylight, surrounded by witnesses, without ever drawing a weapon. We are entering the domain of the puppet master. We are talking about the chaotic duality of fury and calm. To the uninitiated, the fury spell, and its higher level variants like frenzy, seems counterintuitive. Why would you want to make an enemy attack faster? Why would you buff their aggression? And calm seems equally passive. Why make an enemy stop fighting just so you can walk away? It feels like a delay tactic, not a solution. But the game-breaking potential of fury lies in its interaction with the crime system and the faction AI. Skyrim's justice system is rigid. If you hit Nazim, you go to jail. If you kill him, you go to jail. But if Nazim decides of his own free will to draw an iron dagger and attack a Whiterun guard, the guard will legally execute him on the spot. The player incurs no bounty. The player is merely a bystander. This is the social assassination. With the quiet casting perk, essential for this strategy, your spells become silent. You can stand in the middle of the Cloud District, hidden in a crouch behind a bench, and cast Fury on a target. The spell hits. The target's screen metaphorically turns red. Their aggression stat spikes to 100. They perceive everyone around them as a mortal threat. Nazim draws his dagger. The nearest guard perceives this as an assault on the peace. The guard draws his sword. 3 seconds later, the problem is solved. You have successfully eliminated an essential NPC or a hated rival, without ever technically committing a crime. The game logic sees the target as the aggressor. You're just the wind that whispered madness into their ear. This turns the game into a simulation of political intrigue. You can wipe out entire barracks of guards by frenzying one of them and watching his brothers cut him down, then frenzying the survivor until only one battered guard remains. You haven't dealt a single point of damage, yet you have cleared the room. This mechanic transforms the Dark Brotherhood contracts from stealth missions into chaotic spectacles. Why sneak into a wedding to kill the bride when you can cast Frenzy on the groom and have him do it? It is the ultimate cruelty. It rewrites the narrative of the game from a heroic epic to a tragedy where everyone around the Dragonborn slowly loses their minds. But what if the chaos gets out of hand? What if the guard comes for you? This is where Calm and Pacify breaks the game mechanics even further. Calm is the reset button. In most games, once you trigger a boss fight or aggro a room, you are locked in combat until one side dies. Calm violates this rule. You can walk up to a bandit chief who is midway through a power attack, cast Calm, and he will sheath his weapon. He will look at you, smile, and say, "Need something?" This allows for the infinite stealth backstab loop. The mechanics work like this. You sneak up on an enemy. You deliver a sneak attack for X30 damage with daggers and gloves. The enemy survives and turns around furious. You cast Calm. The enemy instantly forgives you. They reset to a non-hostile state. You crouch again. Because they are not hostile, you are instantly hidden. You sneak attack again. You can dismantle the Ebony Warrior, the toughest boss in the game, by simply stabbing him, apologizing with magic and stabbing him again. He never gets to swing his sword. It turns the combat system into a turn-based game where it is always your turn. There is a profound cognitive dissonance in this gameplay loop. The enemy is covered in their own blood, dying, yet they are politely waiting for you to finish the job because a green light told them you're a friend. It exposes the artificiality of the AI. in a way that is both hilarious and game-breaking. Let's look at the lore implications. The book Incident at Necrom gives us a chilling glimpse into the reality of illusion magic. It describes an illusionist who doesn't just make people angry, he overlays terrifying hallucinations over their reality. When you cast Fury, the target might see the shopkeeper as a Dremora lord about to strike. When you cast Calm, you are likely flooding their brain with magical opiates, or stripping away their capacity to care about their own survival. The community has long debated the morality of the illusionist versus the necromancer. The necromancer enslaves the dead, which is considered a taboo, but the illusionist enslaves the living. Is it not worse to force a man to kill his wife in a magically induced rage than to raise a skeleton? The illusionist is arguably the most evil archetype in the Elder Scrolls universe, yet because there are no corpses, initially, and no purple magic, it is seen as civilized. There is also a specific exploit involving scripted conversations. Many quests in Skyrim rely on NPCs talking to each other to advance the plot. Sometimes these bug out. Sometimes an NPC becomes hostile due to a stray arrow or a bounty, locking you out of the quest. Calm is the universal bug fixer. A hostile quest giver cannot speak to you. A calmed one can. By casting Pacify, you force the game engine to switch the NPC from the combat state to the dialogue state, allowing you to turn in quests even while the NPC technically wants you dead. You are forcing them to do their job at gunpoint, or rather, at spell point. Consider the pacifist heist. You want the loot at the end of the dungeon, but you don't want to fight the 20-former in the way. With high-level Pacify spells and the Master of the Mind perk to affect creatures, you can simply walk to the end. You cast Harmony, the Master-level Calm spell, in every room. The Fulmer sheathe their weapons. You walk past them, looting the chests while they stand there, listening to the soothing hum of your magic. You take the grand prize and walk out. You haven't killed a soul. You have simply drugged an entire ecosystem into compliance. The visual and audio design of these spells reinforces their function. Fury is red, jagged, and sounds like a distorted screech, an auditory headache. Calm is green, soft, and sounds like a harmonizing choir or a gently vibrating bell. It is Pavlovian. Red means chaos, green means safety. We must also mention the Rally-Fury combination on a single target, a super soldier exploit. If you cast Fury on an enemy and then cast Rally, which buffs health and stamina, on them, you're creating a monster. You can turn a random mudcrab into a boss fight for the local guards. Why? For entertainment. For the sheer god-complex joy of watching the systems of Skyrim collide. You are the director of the play, and everyone else is just an actor who doesn't know the script. And finally, there is the reset vendor trick. If you accidentally attack a merchant, or if you get caught stealing and they refuse to sell to you, a calm spell resets their disposition. They go from never should have come here to trinkets, odds and ends, that sort of thing in a split second. You are literally gaslighting the economy. So we have turned the population of Skyrim into our personal puppets, forcing them to fight our battles or stand still while we rob them. We have mastered the mind, but the mind is intangible. Eventually you will face something that has no mind to manipulate, or you will simply tire of the subtlety. Sometimes you just want to walk into a room and have everything die simply because you are standing there. You want your very presence to be lethal. For that, we must leave the subtle schools and return to destruction, but not to the flashy fireballs. We are looking at the spells that cloak you in the elements, and the hidden mechanic that turns a simple dagger into a weapon of mass destruction. We leave the crowded markets and the manipulated minds of the city behind. We have whispered madness into the ears of guards and calmed the rage of bandit chiefs. But sometimes, you don't want to talk. Sometimes, you don't even want to cast. You just want to exist, and by virtue of your existence, you want everything around you to suffer. We are stepping into the elemental embrace of the cloak spells, Flame Cloak, Frost Cloak, and Lightning Cloak, and discovering how these low damage toggles are actually the engine behind the highest damage per second numbers in the game. To the casual observer, cloak spells are underwhelming. You cast them, and for 60 seconds, you are surrounded by a wreath of fire, ice, or sparks. The description usually promises something meagre. 8 points of damage per second to nearby enemies. 8 points. In a game where a legendary dragon has thousands of hit points, 8 points a second is a rounding error. It's a gentle warmth, not a weapon. Most players use it once, realise it takes 3 seconds to cast and costs a chunk of magicka, and go back to dual casting Incinerate. But the useless label ignores the mechanics of scaling and the concept of passive execution. Let's start with the Lightning Cloak and its interaction with the Disintegrate perk in the Destruction tree. This is perhaps the single most efficient killing mechanic in Skyrim. The Disintegrate perk states that if a shock spell hits an enemy with low health, under 15%, they instantly turn to ash. It is an execute command. When you have Lightning Cloak active, you're emitting a constant 360-degree check for this condition. You don't need to aim. You don't need to time a thunderbolt. You simply stand there. Any enemy that falls below that 15% threshold within melee range simply ceases to exist. In a chaotic melee with multiple enemies, this is devastating. You're whittling them down with your weapon, and the moment they enter the kill range, the cloak claims them. It prevents the enemy from healing, from fleeing, or from getting that last desperate swing in. You are a walking event horizon. But the outline promised a connection to weapon enchantments, and this is where the math of Skyrim breaks completely. It involves the augmented perks, augmented flames, frost, and shock. Most players take these perks to boost their spells. If you are a cloak user, you take them to make your 8 damage become 12 damage. But here is the game-breaking secret. The game classifies elemental weapon enchantments as destruction magic. If you're running a spellsword build, one hand with a sword, one hand with a spell, and you invest in the augmented perks to buff your cloak spells, you are inadvertently supercharging your weapon enchantments. But it goes deeper. The Chaos Damage enchantment from the Dragonborn DLC has a chance to deal fire, frost, and shock damage. Because it contains all 3 elements, the game applies all 3. Augmented perks to the weapon's damage calculation if you have them. Now combine this with a potion of fortified destruction. This is the hidden mechanic. In the game's code, fortified destruction doesn't just boost the damage of your fireball, it boosts the magnitude of all destruction effects originating from the player. This includes the cloak spell ticking away on your body and the enchantment on the sword in your hand. When you drink a high-level glowing potion to buff your cloak, trying to make that 8 damage useful, the game applies that same massive multiplier to your sword. Suddenly, your Chaos Damage enchantment isn't dealing 50 damage, it's dealing 200, 300 damage per hit. The cloak acts as the visual timer for your godhood. As long as the cloak is burning and the potion is active, you're dealing damage numbers that shouldn't exist in the vanilla game. The cloak is the radiator that justifies the build, the constant application of the destruction tag that ties the kit together. There is also the stealth application, specifically the Ghost of the Hearth strategy. With the quiet casting perk from the illusion tree, your shouts and spells are silent. However, the damage from a cloak spell does not always break stealth if the enemy cannot find the source. You can sneak up behind a target, cast a cloak silently, and simply crouch near them. They will take damage. They will look around, confused. Must have been the wind, they say, as their skin slowly blisters from the heat. It is a slow, sadistic way to clear a room, but it is entirely possible to kill an enemy without ever attacking them, simply by being a hostile ambient temperature in their vicinity. Let's touch on an obscure lore tidbit regarding the Flame Cloak. In the quest J'zargo's Experiment at the College of Winterhold, the eager Khajiit apprentice gives you scrolls for a flame cloak he invented. He asks you to test them on the undead. The joke, of course, is that the scrolls are unstable and cause you to explode, damaging you as well. This hints at the volatile nature of cloak magic in the lore. It isn't just a shield, it is a containment field. You're holding the elements just off your skin. The difference between a master wizard and a pile of ash is the ability to keep that fire 1 inch away from your own pores. We must also discuss the swimming utility. In the freezing waters of the Sea of Ghosts, specifically if you're using survival mods, or the survival mode creation, freezing water kills you. But the Flame Cloak spell warms the air around you. It prevents freezing damage. It turns the deadly ocean into a heated pool. This is one of the few instances where a combat spell has a direct environmental survival application. You can dive for shipwrecks in the Arctic Circle, protected by your own personal radiator. There is a fan theory that the dragon priests of old, specifically the ones like Asidal who mastered fire, did not just cast cloaks, but permanently altered their souls to radiate power. The in-game mask of Azadal increases fire damage, and when worn with his armor set grants Azadal's genius, boosting Enchanting. This reinforces the connection between the destruction element, fire, and the creation of magical items, Enchanting. The cloak is the bridge between the two. It is the active expression of the enchanter's will. Visually, the cloaks are stunning, especially in the dark. The frost cloak surrounds you with a swirling blizzard of ice shards and cold mist. The lighting cloak crackles with violet energy. But the sound design is where the ASMR factor comes in. The flame cloak has a low, roaring rumble, like a bonfire. The frost cloak sounds like wind howling through a crack in a window. The lightning cloak has a high-pitched static buzz. Layering these sounds over the dungeon ambiance creates a bubble of white noise. You're walking in your own soundscape, isolated from the creaks and groans of the crypt. Consider the Vampire Lord synergy. If you transform into a Vampire Lord, many of your active effects carry over. If you cast a cloak spell before transforming, you become a floating clawed demon surrounded by a vortex of lightning. The Vampire Lord form has a drain life spell, but it lacks close-range get-off-me tools. The cloak solves this. It adds a layer of DPS to your melee claw attacks. You become a ball of death that hurts to touch. And finally, there is the aggro magnet function. In a large battle, like the Civil War sieges, enemies often ignore the player to fight generic soldiers. A cloak spell draws a Gru. The moment an enemy enters your radius and takes that one tick of damage, they turn to you. It allows you to tank by proximity. You don't need to taunt, you just need to stand there. You become the centre of attention because you are literally the most irritating thing on the battlefield. So, we have turned the air around us into a weapon. We have used the logic of destruction perks to break the math of our swords. We are a walking storm, but sometimes you don't want to kill the enemy. Sometimes you don't even want them to be an enemy anymore. Sometimes you just want to put them in a timeout so you can deal with their friends. We are moving from the continuous damage of the cloak to the absolute stillness of the ash. We leave the crackling energy of the cloak spells and the mainland of Skyrim behind. We board the Northern Maiden, endure the seasickness, and step onto the grey, soot-covered docks of Raven Rock. We are in the domain of Solstheim, a land where the very air tastes like sulphur and the ground crunches with the debris of Red Mountain. Here, amidst the giant mushrooms and the chitin-clad warriors, lives Master Neloth of House Telvanni. He is arrogant, abrasive, and obsessed with tea. But he also guards the secret to a branch of magic that most players test once and then discard in frustration: Ash Magic. Specifically, the spell Ash Shell. To the uninitiated, Ash Shell is the most counterproductive spell in the game. You cast it on an enemy, and they are instantly encased in a hardened shell of volcanic ash. They cannot move, they cannot attack, but, and here is the deal breaker for the average player, they also cannot be attacked. They become invulnerable. In a game built around reducing the enemy's health bar to 0 as fast as possible, why would you cast a spell that makes the enemy immortal for 30 seconds? It feels like you are helping them. You're giving them a coffee break in the middle of a death match. Most players cast it, swing their sword at the statue, hear the clink of invulnerability, realise they are doing 0 damage and never equip the spell again. But the useless label fails to account for the single most important tactical concept in high-level combat: the action economy. Skyrim's difficulty is rarely about the strength of a single enemy, unless it's the Ebony Warrior or Karstarg. The difficulty comes from numbers. Getting swarmed by 5 bandit marauders is lethal, because you can only block one direction at a time. Ash Shell is the great equalizer. It is not a damage spell, it is a save for later button. Imagine you're in a room with a Draugr Deathlord, a Necromancer, and 2 Restless Draugr. This is a dangerous encounter. You're taking fire from all sides. You cast Ash Shell on the Deathlord. He is now a statue. He is out of the fight. You cast Ash Shell on the Necromancer. She is also a statue. Now the fight is just you versus 2 weak Restless Draugr. You kill them easily. Then, you wait for the Necromancer's shell to crumble. You kill her. Finally, the Deathlord breaks free and you engage him in a 1v1 duel. Ash Shell allows you to dismantle a mob encounter piece by piece. It turns a chaotic brawl into a series of manageable duels. It removes the variable of getting overwhelmed. You are the bouncer of the dungeon, deciding who gets to fight and who has to wait outside. This utility extends to the essential NPC problem. We have all been there. A quest bugs out or you accidentally anger an NPC who cannot be killed because they are important to the plot. They chase you, dealing damage, and you can only knock them down to their knees before they get back up again. It is annoying. Ash Shell solves this. It works on essential NPCs. You can encase the Jarl, the quest giver, or the glitched follower in Ash. They stop attacking. You can make your escape or wait for the aggro to reset. You are putting them in a magical timeout corner until they learn to behave. There is a game-breaking exploit here involving full damage. While the shell protects the target from weapon and spell damage, the physics engine is inconsistent. If you use a spell like Telekinesis or a Vampiric Grip, if you are a Vampire Lord, to lift an enemy high into the air and then hit them with an ash shell before dropping them, the game sometimes calculates the full damage after the shell breaks, or the shell preserves their momentum in strange ways. But the more reliable trick is the ledge punt. An enemy encased in ash has physics. They are a solid object. You can shout unrelenting force at the statue. They will ragdoll, stiffly, off the cliff. They might be invulnerable to the shout's damage, but they are not invulnerable to the bottom of the ravine. You are effectively shipping them to their doom via express post. Let's talk about the lore. The ash spells are unique to Solstheim, derived from the research of Master Neloth and his study of the heart stones. These stones are fragments of red lyrium-like material ejected from Red Mountain, imbued with the background radiation of the heart of Lorcan. When you cast Ash Shell, you aren't just covering them in dirt, you're wrapping them in a cocoon of solidified divine trauma. You're using the debris of a dead god to silence your enemies. There is an obscure lore tidbit found in Neloth's dialogue, if you listen past his insults. He implies that ash magic is a form of containment magic, originally theorized to bind ash spawn, creatures that are effectively chaotic spirits animating dust. The spell reverses their nature, solidifying the dust so the spirit cannot move it. When applied to a living human, it creates a shell so dense that not even air can pass through, yet the target does not suffocate. This suggests the target is placed in a form of temporal stasis, frozen in the moment of impact. The community has long debated the implications of this stasis. If the target is invulnerable, does that mean they are cut off from Nirn entirely? Some fan theories suggest that the ash shell momentarily shifts the target into a pocket realm of oblivion, or perhaps the ash pit, Malakath's realm, which is why your sword passes through them. They are there visually, but physically they are elsewhere. Tactically, ash shell is also the ultimate tool for the pacifist thief. You enter a house to steal a quest item. The owner wakes up. Instead of killing them or running away, you ash shell them. You calmly loot the chest while they watch, frozen and helpless, effectively a piece of furniture in their own home. Then you leave. When the shell breaks, you are gone. No bounty for murder, just a very confused and dusty homeowner. Visually, the spell is stark. The target turns a matte, dark grey. All colour is drained. In the vibrant alien forests of Solstheim, these statues look like grim monuments. The sound design is fantastic. A heavy, dry thud followed by the sound of settling dust. It sounds heavy. It sounds final. We must also mention the Ash Guardian. This is the master-level variant where you summon a permanent entity. However, the useless quirk is that if you don't have a Heartstone in your inventory, the Guardian is hostile and attacks you. But for the clever player, this is a weapon. You can summon a hostile Ash Guardian in the middle of a bandit camp and then run away, or turn invisible. The Guardian will destroy the bandits for you. You have summoned a raid boss and let it loose. You didn't summon an ally. You summoned a natural disaster. And let's not forget the interaction with dragons. While you cannot usually Ash Shell a dragon, they are too large and resistant, you can Ash Shell the random animals and giants that distract the dragon. If a dragon is focusing on a mammoth instead of you, and you want its attention, or you want to save the mammoth, you shell the mammoth. The dragon breathes fire on the statue, gets bored because it does no damage, and turns to you. You are curating the battlefield, removing distractions. There is a distinct rhythm to playing an Ash Mage. It is slower. It is more thoughtful. You aren't spamming fireballs. You're walking into a room, assessing the threats, and deciding, you stay, you die. It is the magic of the control freak, but perhaps you are tired of controlling the enemy. Perhaps you want to benefit from them in a more direct way. What if I told you that the enemy's health bar is not just a thing to be depleted, but a resource to be farmed? What if the most useless healing spell in the game is actually the key to infinite experience points? We leave the dry ash of Solstheim and return to the basic restoration spells, to a specific hand gesture that seems indistinguishable from kindness, but is actually pure greed. The ash settles on the volcanic plains of Solstheim, leaving our enemies frozen in grey, timeless monuments. We have learned to stop the fight, to pause the chaos. But sometimes you don't want the fight to end. Sometimes you look at your skill tree, that one-handed skill sitting at level 45, that destruction skill stuck at 60, and you realise that killing enemies is actually inefficient. When an enemy dies, the training ends. You have to find another one. You have to travel. You have to load screens. What if the enemy never died? What if you could trap them in a cycle of agony and renewal, harvesting them for experience points like a farmer harvests wheat? We turn our gaze to the Restoration School, specifically to the spell that seems baffling to use in combat, Healing Hands. To the uninitiated, Healing Hands is the co-op spell. It emits a constant stream of golden energy that restores the health of the target. In a single-player game like Skyrim, its intended use is limited. You heal your follower, Lydia, when she takes a knee. You heal a dog you found. Maybe, if you are role-playing a benevolent priest, you heal a wounded soldier. But using it on a bandit, on a dragon, that seems like madness. Why undo the damage you just worked so hard to inflict? It appears to be the ultimate useless action, negating your own progress. But the game-breaking reality is that Skyrim does not reward you for killing, it rewards you for doing. You gain one-handed experience based on the base damage of the weapon swinging into a valid target. You gain destruction experience based on the magicka cost and damage of the spell hitting a valid target. The death of the enemy is actually a failure state for the grinder, because it removes the valid target. Healing Hands transforms any enemy into an infinite punching bag. Consider the mud crab Jim. You find a solitary mud crab on the shores near Dawnstar. It nips at your ankles. It deals negligible damage. Instead of crushing it, you equip a shield in your left hand and Healing Hands in your right. You let the mud crab hit your shield. You gain block experience. When the mud crab gets tired, metaphorically, you lower the shield and cast Healing Hands on the crab. You top off its health, then you let it hit you again. You are boosting your armor skill, light or heavy, your block skill and your restoration skill simultaneously. You're dancing with a crustacean, entering a symbiotic relationship where neither of you dies, but you become a god of defense, but that is small time. Let's look at the dark art of the torture chamber grind. If you join the Dark Brotherhood and purchase the torture room upgrade for the Dawnstar Sanctuary, you're given 4 victims chained to the wall. They cannot attack you, they cannot run, they have roughly 100 health. They are the perfect test subjects. You equip a low damage dagger to ensure you don't accidentally execute them with a critical hit, and Healing Hands, you slash, shing, experience points for one-handed, you heal, shh, experience points for restoration, you slash again. This loop is arguably the darkest mechanical interaction in the game. You're keeping these people alive solely to brutalize them for self-improvement. The game mechanics don't judge you, they just award the XP. It is a grim efficiency. It removes the travel time of dungeon crawling. Why run through Bleak Falls Barrow seeking Draugr when you have 4 renewable resource nodes chained to a wall in your basement? This strategy reaches its peak with the Shadowmere exploit. Shadowmere, the legendary horse of the Dark Brotherhood, possesses an absurdly high health regeneration rate and a massive health pool. He is, for all intents and purposes, unkillable by standard means. He is also technically a valid combat target if you attack him. The game treats him as an NPC, so you stand in the forest near Falkreath. You crank the difficulty up to legendary, which reduces your damage output, allowing you to hit him more times before his health bar drops. You equip your weapon of choice. You start swinging. You beat your own horse. For hours. If his health dips too low, you swap to Healing Hands and bring him back up. Shadowmere just stands there, staring at you with those glowing red eyes, stoic and accepting of his role as your personal training dummy. There is a fan theory that Shadowmere is a Daedra, or a spirit sent by Sithis, and thus feels no pain, or perhaps enjoys the violence. This rationalization helps players sleep at night, but the visual is undeniably absurd. The saviour of the world, the Dragonborn, spending 3 in-game days relentlessly attacking a horse to learn how to use a greatsword. But let's talk about the Respite perk. This is where the build synergizes into a perpetual motion machine. The Respite perk in the Restoration tree makes healing spells restore stamina as well as health. When you are power leveling two-handed weapons, you rely on power attacks for maximum XP gain. Power attacks drain stamina. Usually you have to wait for the green bar to recharge. But if you are using the Healing Hands loop, perhaps on a follower you are sparring with, or a very patient giant, you can cast Healing Hands on yourself, using the standard healing spell, or use the Grand Healing Area of Effect spell to heal both you and your victim. The Respite perk refills your stamina instantly. Swing, swing, power attack, empty stamina. Heal, full stamina. Swing, swing, power attack. There is no downtime. The rhythm is hypnotic. You are bypassing the resource management mechanics entirely. You are a machine that turns magicka into stamina and stamina into XP. We must also look at the Equilibrium spell from the Alteration School. This spell converts your health into magicka. When you combine this with Healing Hands, or a self-heal, you create the Infinity Loop. You use magicka to heal yourself, gaining Restoration XP. You use Equilibrium to drain your health to refill magicka, gaining Alteration XP. You juggle your life force back and forth between the red bar and the blue bar. You're leveling 2 schools of magic while standing perfectly still, effectively cannibalizing your own vitality to feed your magical growth. There is a lore tidbit involving the Restoration is a valid school of magic debate. Colette Marance is desperate for validation, but if you look at the actual spell tomes, Restoration includes Poison Rune, Dragonborn DLC, and Sunfire, Dawnguard. It is a school of life and death. The fact that Healing Hands can be used to prolong the suffering of an enemy aligns with the Ayleid history of flesh sculpture and magical torture. You're not saving them, you're denying them the release of death. It is the cruelest school of magic if used creatively. Visually, the Healing Hands spell is beautiful. It is a warm golden light. It has particles that float like fireflies. The sound is a soothing, high-pitched hum like a choir of angels. Using this aesthetic to facilitate a beatdown creates a dissonant horror. You're bathing the torture victim in the light of the divines while stabbing them with a rusty shiv. It creates a complex narrative about the Dragonborn's morality, or lack thereof. Consider also the Civil War camp exploit. The commanders of the Imperial or Stormcloak camps, the ones with the legate or associated titles, are flagged as essential so the war questline doesn't break. They cannot die. If you deplete their health, they take a knee. This is the downed state. Usually they get up after a minute with full health. If you use Healing Hands on a downed essential enemy, you force them to stand up immediately. You don't have to wait. You knock them down, gaining combat XP. You heal them up, gaining Restoration XP. They stand up, angry and ready to fight. You knock them down again. It is a seamless cycle of violence. You're reviving your enemy just to kill them again, over and over, like a sadistic Valkyrie. This turns the useless spell into a tool for speedrunners and min-maxers. It is the key to reaching level 81 and beyond without ever finishing the main quest. You can master every martial and magical art without leaving the safety of the tutorial area or the first bandit camp. And let's not forget the followers aspect. Sometimes your follower is the one dealing the damage. If you want to level a follower's combat skills, if you're using mods that allow tracking or simply want them to be effective, you can play the dedicated healer. You find a giant. You send Lydia in. She tanks. You stand back and hold Healing Hands on her. She cannot die because your healing per second outpaces the giant's damage per second. She gets to hit the giant hundreds of times, leveling her hidden stats. You are the battery pack that makes her invincible. The healing enemy mechanic also has a niche use in pacifying glitches. Sometimes an NPC gets stuck in a combat loop where they are low health and fleeing but won't reset. Healing them to full health often resets their AI bravery. They realise they aren't dying anymore, so they stop fleeing and re-engage, or allow you to cast Calm. You're fixing their broken brain by fixing their broken body. So, we have turned the act of mercy into a system of infinite grinding. We have turned our horse into a punching bag, and the local mud crabs into sparring partners. We've used the golden light of the Aedra to fuel our dark ambition for higher numbers. But what if we are tired of grinding? What if we want to carry the spoils of our war? What if the weight of all those dragon bones and iron daggers is dragging us down? We look to the necromancy tree, not to raise an army of warriors, but to raise something far more practical, a walking backpack. The golden light of the healing hands fades, and the screams of our training partners fall silent. We have honed our skills, we have broken the levelling curve, but now we face the most mundane and crushing adversary in all of Skyrim, gravity, or more specifically, encumbrance. You have just cleared a Dwemer ruin. You're surrounded by solid Dwemer metal struts, heavy Falmer armour, and perhaps a few dragon bones. You want it all. But the text in the top left corner is unforgiving. You are over-encumbered and cannot run. You're reduced to a slow, painful shuffle. You could drop the loot. You could give it to Lydia, but even she has her limits before she grumbles and refuses to take another Centurion Dynamo core. We need a solution that defies the laws of physics. We need a backpack that walks. We need to talk about the necromancy branch of conjuration, specifically the master-level spell Dead Thrall, and why its true purpose has nothing to do with combat and everything to do with being a magical moving van. To the combat-focused mage, Dead Thrall is often seen as a buggy mess. You cast it on a humanoid corpse, and they rise to fight for you permanently until killed. But the AI is atrocious. Thralls get stuck on doorframes. They moan incessantly, ruining the stealth atmosphere. They often get lost when you fast travel. Compared to a Dremora Lord who screams "I smell weakness" and decapitates your enemies, a Dead Thrall is a shambling disappointment. But the useless combatant is the ultimate useless utility tool because of one game-breaking fact. Corpses have no weight limit. Or rather, while they have a weight limit for equipped gear, they have an infinite capacity for stored items. When you kill a bandit, you can open their inventory and place an unlimited number of items onto their body. You can stuff 50 dragon bones, 10 sets of plate armour, and a library's worth of books into the pockets of a single dead bandit. The game does not check for logic here. The corpse becomes a container with infinite volume. Now you cast Dead Thrall. The container stands up. It follows you. You have just created a pack mule with infinite carrying capacity. You're no longer limited by your 300 or 400 carry weight. You are limited only by your ability to tolerate the groaning of your undead luggage. You can clear out an entire dungeon, every rusted dagger, every linen wrap, every heavy Dwemer strut, load it all onto your thrall, and walk out the front door at a brisk sprinting pace. When you reach the merchant, you simply kill the thrall or cast a cloak spell to damage them, loot their corpse, sell the items, and then raise them again. This changes the economy of the game. Usually the value-to-weight ratio dictates what you pick up. You leave the iron armour because it's heavy and cheap. You take the gems. With a Dead Thrall, the ratio is irrelevant. You take everything. You become a vacuum cleaner for the province. You strip the dungeon bare, leaving nothing but the textures on the walls. There is a specific interaction with the ash pile mechanics that we must address. Lower-level spells like Reanimate Corpse turn the body to ash when the spell ends. This is usually bad, as ash piles are temporary and can despawn. Dead Thrall, however, leaves the body intact. This allows for the creation of a permanent storage unit. Some players take this a step further and utilise Housecarl Thralls. If you accidentally or purposefully kill a Housecarl or a named NPC with a unique permanent body, one that the game engine is scripted never to delete, usually for quest reasons, you can drag their body to your house, pile your excess loot into them, and leave them in the corner. They become a chest that looks like a person. It is macabre, it is horrifying, but it is efficient. Let's delve into the lore. Necromancy in Skyrim is generally frowned upon, but legal outside of the Mages Guild's old rules. The practice is detailed in the book Corpse Preparation. The text treats the body not as a person, but as a vessel, a collection of biological levers and pulleys to be manipulated. The inventory management strategy aligns perfectly with the mindset of a true necromancer like Mannimarco. To the King of Worms, a corpse is a tool. Why shouldn't it carry your luggage? It has a back, it has legs, and it no longer complains about back pain. It is the perfect servant. There is an obscure mechanics interactions involving thrall gear. If you equip your thrall with specific enchanted armour, they gain the benefits. You can give them Fortify Carry Weight boots, if you want to roleplay that the weight matters, though the infinite storage exploit bypasses this. But the true obscurity is the Sebastian Lort exploit. There are certain named NPCs in the game who, due to scripting errors or unique flags, respawn their default inventory when they die and are re-raised, effectively duplicating items. While this is more of a duplication glitch, it ties into the Necromancer's toolkit. You are farming the dead for resources. Fan theories often discuss the nature of the Thrall's soul. When you cast Dead Thrall, are you pulling the original soul back from Aetherius, or Sovngarde? Or are you shoving a minor Daedra into the meat suit to pilot it? The spell description says reanimate, implying the original animus is restored. If so, imagine the horror of the bandit chief. He died defending his camp. He went to the afterlife. Then he was yanked back, cold and rotting, forced to carry 3 tons of Dwemer scrap metal for the person who killed him, unable to speak, unable to disobey. It turns the Dragonborn into a monster far worse than Alduin. Alduin just eats the world. The Dragonborn turns it into a logistical nightmare. Visually, the Dead Thrall adds a layer of grit to your adventure. They have a distinct blue glow, unless you use mods to remove it, and they make that specific, wet, guttural moaning sound. Ah. Walking through the pristine snowy streets of Windhelm with a groaning zombie towing your loot is a power move. It upsets the NPCs. They say, "That spell looks dangerous, keep your distance." But they don't stop you. They know you have a walking bank vault behind you. There is also the glitch utility of using a thrall to bypass pressure plates. Dungeons often have traps triggered by weight. You can command your thrall, using the interaction menu, to stand on a plate. They are heavy. They trigger the mechanism. You walk through the gate. You're using their dead weight to solve puzzles. And let's not forget the courier method. If you are playing with survival restrictions where fast travel is disabled, the dead thrall becomes essential. You cannot carry the loot across the map, but the thrall can. You lead them on a cross-country pilgrimage from Markarth to Riften. If they die to a bear, you just kill the bear, recast the spell and keep moving. You're a caravan of the damned. However, there is a risk. The physics explosion. Sometimes, if you put too many items into a single corpse, we are talking thousands, the physics engine panics when the thrall dies and ragdolls. The body might spasm, launch into the stratosphere or clip through the floor, taking your legendary loot into the void. It is the game's way of punishing your greed. A lesson from the divines. You can cheat death, but you cannot cheat the Havoc physics engine. This strategy also makes the ritual stone, which we will discuss later, even more viable. But for a single thrall, the master spell is king. It signifies status. You're not just a conjurer, you're a master of life and death who uses that power to avoid paying for a courier service. So, we have solved the problem of weight. We have turned the dead into luggage. We can carry the world on our shoulders, or rather, on theirs. But carrying the loot is one thing. Getting the loot in the first place often requires dealing with enemies who are fast, erratic and annoying. Enemies that dodge your fireballs. What if you didn't need to aim? What if you could use the most basic level 1 destruction spell to stun-lock an enemy simply by tapping a button like a telegraph operator? We return to the very first spell you ever learned, to find a hidden rhythm that breaks combat completely. The groans of your undead pack mule fade behind you as you step away from the merchant's counter, your pockets filled with gold and your burden lightened. You have mastered the art of logistics. You have turned the dead into cargo. But as you step back out into the wilds, you realise that carrying loot is only half the equation. You still have to kill things to get it. And looking at your magicka bar, you might feel a pang of anxiety. The high-level spells we've discussed, the runes, the cloaks, the paralysing ash, they are expensive. They drain your reserves dry in seconds. What if you have no potions? What if you are level 1, fresh out of the wagon at Helgen, with nothing but a robe and a dream? We return to the very beginning. We return to the spells that every single player starts with, the spells that are universally discarded the moment a firebolt tome is found. We're talking about the concentration spells, flames, frostbite, and sparks. And we are talking about the spray tapping technique that turns these novice flickering lights into the most magicka-efficient weapons in the history of Tamriel. To the average archmage, flames is a joke. It does 8 points of damage per second. It has a short range. It looks like you are trying to light a campfire rather than slay a dragon. The standard way to use it is to hold the button down. You spray a continuous stream of fire. The enemy takes steady, low damage. Your magicka bar drains steadily. It is a linear exchange of energy for hurt. It is fair, it is balanced, and it is incredibly weak. But the seasoned exploit hunter knows that the Skyrim engine has a quirk regarding how it calculates contact. When a concentration spell like Flames first connects with a target, it applies an impact tick. It also applies a damage over time effect, the burning status, that lingers for a second or two. Here is the secret. The impact tick and the application of the burning effect happen instantly upon the button press. If you hold the button, you get the standard damage per second, but if you tap the button, rapidly clicking or pulling the trigger, releasing and pulling again, you are reapplying that initial impact tick and refreshing the burn damage over and over again, faster than the standard tick rate of the sustained beam. You're effectively cancelling the animation of the stream to reset the damage calculation. This is the spray tapping technique. By feathering the trigger, you're not spraying a flamethrower, you're firing a semi-automatic pulse rifle of heat. The damage output skyrockets. You can melt a troll's health bar at level 5 simply by having a fast finger, but the damage is only the secondary benefit. The true game-breaking aspect is the magicka efficiency. The cost of the spell is calculated per second of sustained casting. When you tap, the game engine struggles to charge you the full amount. You're casting for a fraction of a second, dealing the damage and then stopping. Your magicka regeneration kicks in during the split-second gaps between taps. The result? You have infinite ammo. You can spray tap flames for 10 minutes straight without ever running out of magicka. You can keep the pressure on an enemy indefinitely. You become a perpetual combustion engine. While the Master Wizard is chugging potions to fuel his incinerate spells, the novice tapcaster is dealing comparable DPS for free. Let's look at the Sparks variant of this technique. Sparks does shock damage, which drains magicka from the enemy. Against enemy mages, the tap is devastating. Every tap applies the magicka drain. By fluttering the spell, you're keeping their magicka regeneration paused and stripping their reserves, while your own magicka barely moves. You're winning the resource war by a landslide. It is the magical equivalent of death by 1,000 cuts, except the cuts are free and the knife is made of lightning. There is a distinct visual hilarity to this playstyle. The Dragonborn does not look like a graceful caster. They look like they are having a hand spasm. The spell effect flickers in and out of existence like a broken strobe light. The sound effect, whip, 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 replaces the majestic roar of the fire stream. It breaks immersion in the most effective way possible. It reminds you that you are playing a video game, manipulating a database of numbers rather than inhabiting a fantasy world. But when the enemy falls dead at your feet and your blue bar is still full, the immersion break feels worth it. This technique interacts bizarrely with the aspect of terror perk in the illusion tree. Yes, illusion. Due to a tagging error in the vanilla game's files, fire spells are tagged with a keyword that interacts with fear mechanics, likely because fire causes fear. The aspect of terror perk boosts the magnitude of fear spells. Because of this tag, taking the perk adds a flat +110 damage to your fire spells. On a high damage spell like Fireball, +110 is nice but not game-changing. On Flames, which does 8 damage, +10 is a more than 100% damage increase. And when you tap the spell, applying that base damage repeatedly in rapid succession, that +10 is applied every single time. You're effectively machine gunning flat damage bonuses. A novice spell buffed by an illusion perk and a twitchy finger out-damages expert level spells. Let's consider the cone of effect and the spray aspect. Flames and Frostbite are not lasers, they are cones. If you move your crosshair rapidly back and forth, spraying the room, while tapping, you can cover a wide area. You can apply the burning effect to a group of 3 or 4 bandits simultaneously with a single tap sweep. You are tagging them. This is particularly useful with Frostbite and the Deep Freeze perk, if you have it, though that applies to health thresholds. But mainly, Frostbite applies a slow. By tap spraying a group of charging enemies, you apply the slow effect to all of them for a fraction of the cost of a Frost Breath shout. You're managing the crowd with a garden hose of ice. There is an obscure lore tidbit found in response to Barrow's speech, a book where a destruction mage argues that destruction is superior to alteration. The author discusses the refined control of magicka. While the book focuses on power, The subtext of destruction mastery is often about containing the energy. The tap technique could be interpreted in lore not as a spasm, but as a series of microcasts, high-intensity bursts of magicka that are far hotter and more violent than a sustained, stable stream. The novice holds the stream because it is safe, the master pulses the stream because it destroys. It is the difference between a steady candle and a series of explosions. Tactically, the spray tap is the ultimate counter to the regenerating enemy. Trolls and Spriggans regenerate health rapidly. If you miss a firebolt, they heal back the damage before you can cast again. The sustained flames stream stops regeneration, but does low damage. The tap strategy offers the best of both worlds. It applies the fire dot constantly to halt regeneration, but the high DPS of the clicks actually outpaces their healing significantly. You don't need a torch, you just need an itchy trigger finger. There is also a stagger component to consider, though it is less consistent than the dual cast impact perk. The sheer volume of hits registered by the game engine when tapping can sometimes overwhelm the enemy's animation priority, causing them to flinch or hesitate more often than they would against a continuous beam. It interrupts their AI decision-making loops. They're getting hit with new information. I am on fire 10 times a second. Fan communities often debate whether this is an exploit or a feature. Purists argue that it bypasses the intended mana costs. Pragmatists argue that if the Dragonborn is smart enough to shout time apart, they are smart enough to know that turning the fire on and off really fast hurts more. It is weaving in the MMO sense, adapted for a single-player RPG. Visually, this technique is best used in first person. In third person, the animation of the character's arm jerking up and down can be distracting. But in first person, you feel like a flamethrower trooper. You feel the rhythm, click, click, click. It becomes a musical beat. You are conducting a symphony of low-budget destruction. And we must mention the oil interactions. Skyrim dungeons are full of oil slicks. A sustained stream of fire ignites the oil instantly. A tap ignites it just as well. But because you aren't committing to a long animation, you can tap fire the oil and immediately turn to run. You don't get stuck in the casting pose. It allows for drive-by arsons. You run past a room, tap the floor, the room explodes, and you are already down the hallway. Let's not forget the interaction with wall spells, wall of flames, etc., which are technically expert level but function on the same concentration mechanic. Spray tapping a wall spell allows you to paint the floor with hazards much faster and with less magicka than holding the button. You can create a complex maze of fire on the ground, effectively drawing a do not cross line without draining your entire bar. The spray tap is the weapon of the desperate and the efficient. It is the tool of the level 1 prisoner fighting their way out of the embassy, and the tool of the level 81 god who just can't be bothered to drink a potion. It proves that in Skyrim, the most powerful magic isn't found in ancient tomes at the bottom of a dungeon. It is found in the input settings of your controller. But eventually the clicking finger gets tired. The strobe light effect starts to give you a headache. You crave something more. Resonant. You want to use the voice, but not the shouts everyone uses, not unrelenting force or fire breath. You want the shouts that the greybeards whispered about but no one seemed to listen to, the shouts that interact with the world, the animals and the very sky itself. We are going to explore the forgotten words of power that turn the environment from a backdrop into your greatest ally. The rhythmic clicking of the spray tap technique fades into the background, and the Dragonborn flexes their cramping fingers. We have mastered the art of the frantic low-cost destruction spell. But sometimes frantic is not the mood. Sometimes you want to stand tall, chest expanded, and speak with the authority of the mountains themselves. We leave the realm of magicka and mana bars behind and turn to the ancient cooldown-based magic of the Thuum. Specifically, we are looking at the shouts that most players unlock, shrug at, and bury at the bottom of their magic menu, never to be equipped again. We are talking about the Pacific shouts, Kind's Peace, Clear Skies, and Animal Allegiance, and how they weaponize the environment in ways that make unrelenting force look like a gentle breeze. Let us begin with Kind's Peace. You find the words on the peaks of Ragnvald, Ranveig's Fast, and Shroudhearth Barrow. The description promises to calm wild beasts. To the adventurer decked out in Daedric armor, this is laughable. Who cares about calming a wolf? You can one-shot a wolf with a sweet roll. Why waste a shout cooldown on something so trivial? But the useless label ignores the economics of the giant camp and the safe zone mechanic. Skyrim is dotted with camps inhabited by giants and mammoths. These are high-risk zones. Giants are the gatekeepers of the early game, capable of launching players into the stratosphere with a single club slam. But they also guard giants' toes, one of the most valuable alchemy ingredients in the game, and mammoths possess grand souls for enchanting. Usually, farming these resources is a life-or-death struggle. Kind's Peace turns these camps into grocery stores. The shout has a massive area of effect. When you shout Kean Dremov, you aren't just calming a single wolf, you're emitting a wave of sedation that hits everything with the animal tag in a wide radius. Crucially, giants and mammoths are tagged as animals, or at least creatures affected by the shout. You can walk into Secunda's Kiss, surrounded by 3 giants and 4 mammoths. They turn to crush you. You shout. Instantly, the red dots on your compass vanish. The giants lower their clubs. The mammoths stop trumpeting. They return to their idle animations, staring at the clouds or eating cheese. You can walk right up to the giant's chest, loot it, and walk away. But the true exploit is the backstab farming. When an enemy is calmed, you can sneak attack them. Because they are pacified, they don't immediately detect you. You can hit a mammoth for X30 damage, shout Kind's Peace again to reset their aggression, and hit them again. It turns the most dangerous overland encounters into a harvest. You're not a warrior, you're a shepherd of doom. Now let's pivot to the shout that seems purely cosmetic, Clear Skies. You learn this shout from the Greybeards as a plot device, to clear the mist on the path to the throat of the world. It clears the weather, it stops the rain, it makes the aurora appear at night. It is beautiful, it is atmospheric, and in combat, it is arguably the most broken crowd control tool in the game because of one specific number, the cooldown. The first word of Clear Skies, lock, has a cooldown of only 5 seconds. However, the shout itself has a hidden property. It applies a stagger effect to enemies. It acts like a miniature version of Unrelenting Force. It doesn't launch them across the room, but it interrupts their action. It stops a power attack. It stops a spell cast. It makes a dragon flinch. Do you see the math? A 5-second cooldown means you can use it constantly. You're creating a stun lock loop. You shout lock! The bandit staggers. You land 2 hits with your sword. The bandit recovers and winds up for a swing. Your cooldown is up. You shout lock. He staggers again. You can bully high-level enemies into submission without them ever getting a turn to attack. You're interrupting them every 5 seconds. It is the ultimate tool for the stamina-starved warrior. While Unrelenting Force leaves you vulnerable for 15 to 45 seconds while it recharges, Clear Skies is always ready. It is the jab to Unrelenting Force's haymaker. It keeps the enemy off balance, confused, and presumably very annoyed that the weather keeps changing rapidly around their head. There is a specific interaction with poison gas traps in dungeons. You know, those floor grates that spew green gas, or the trapped chests. Clear Skies clears the gas. The game logic treats the poison gas as weather, or at least a particulate effect that the shout commands to disperse. You can stand in the middle of a trap room, shout at the air and breathe freely. Then we have Animal Allegiance. This is the chaotic cousin of Kind's Peace. Instead of calming the animals, it turns them into allies. The useless critique is that animals are weak. A mud crab won't help you kill a dragon. But the range of this shout is absurdly large. If you are fighting a dragon in the wilderness, and you shout Animal Allegiance, you aren't just calling the wolf you see, you're calling every bear, sabercat and slaughterfish in the zip code. Suddenly, the dragon is swarmed. The AI of the dragon gets confused. It lands to bite a bear. While it is grounded, you attack. But the best use is the proxy war. If you're fighting bandits near a giant camp, shout Animal Allegiance. The mammoths and giants will charge the bandits. There is nothing quite as satisfying as watching a bandit chief who was just taunting you suddenly realize he's being charged by 2 angry mammoths. You sit on a rock and watch the carnage. You have weaponized the ecosystem. There is a fascinating fan theory regarding the voice of the Emperor racial power and the shout Kind's Peace. Lore-wise, Kine is the Nord goddess of the storm and the widow of Shor. She is the mother of men. The shout is a prayer to her. Some fans argue that Kind's Peace works on giants because giants share a common ancestry with the Nords, the Atmarans. The shout reminds them of their ancient heritage, soothing their primitive rage with a racial memory of peace. It's not mind control, it's a family reunion. We must also address Become Ethereal. Many players use this to jump off High Hrothgar without dying. That is fun, but its combat utility is game-breaking for the caster. Become Ethereal makes you invulnerable, but you cannot attack. However, your magicka and stamina regenerate while it is active. It is a timeout button. You are out of magicka? Shout Theme. You turn into a ghost. The enemy swings through you. You stand there for 10 seconds, regenerating your entire mana bar safely. Then you break the shout by casting a spell. It is also the hard counter to Dragon Breath. When a dragon opens its mouth to bathe you in fire, you don't need a shield. You don't need to run. You shout Fame. The fire passes through you harmlessly. You're a ghost in the inferno. It allows you to tank damage that would one-shot any armor build. And there is the casting setup exploit. Master-level spells, like Firestorm or Mass Paralysis, have a long wind-up animation where you are vulnerable. If you shout Become Ethereal first, you can start casting the master spell while ethereal. The shout doesn't break until the spell fires, or effectively protects you during the wind-up depending on the patch version, though usually casting breaks it. The trick is to use it to get into position and let your magicka regen before the big cast, or to avoid the initial aggro while charging a scroll. Let's look at an obscure lore tidbit from the etched tablets on the 7,000 steps. One tablet mentions that the voice is worship. When you use clear skies, you're not demanding the clouds to move. You're speaking the name of the sky so truly that the sky remembers it should be clear. It is a form of tonal architecture. You're editing the song of reality. This explains why it staggers enemies. You are hitting them with a raw fact of existence. You're shouting Sky so loud that their knees buckle. Visually, these shouts are less aggressive than the combat ones, but more majestic. Clear skies causes the clouds to part in a perfect circle, revealing the sun or the moons. It changes the lighting of the entire game world for a moment. It is a reminder of the Dragonborn's connection to the land. And the sound, the deep resonant boom of the sky clearing, is one of the best audio cues in the game. It sounds like a thunderclap in reverse. Consider also the stealth interaction with throw voice. We mentioned it briefly with runes, but on its own it creates a ghost playstyle. The shout has a nearly instant recharge. You can send insults, hey skeever butt, to a corner, wait for the enemy to look and slip past. But the game-breaking part is that it forces the AI to drop their combat state to enter search state if you are hidden. If you're being hunted, throwing your voice can confuse the AI into thinking you have teleported, breaking their tracking lock on your actual position. And finally, the Aura Whisper shout. It is essentially detect life, but it costs no magicka, lasts longer, and detects everything: undead, Daedra, and automatons. It renders the detect life spell obsolete for non-alteration mages. It is the ultimate wall hack. The useless part? It is quiet. It doesn't do damage, it isn't flashy, but knowing exactly where the Centurion is before you turn the corner is the difference between life and a reload screen. So, we have calmed the giants, weaponized the weather, and turned the local wildlife into our personal army. We have used the voice not just to destroy, but to command the stage on which we fight. We have reached the pinnacle of environmental control. But all of these tricks, the tapping, the shouting, the calming, keep us awake. They keep us active. Eventually every adventurer needs to rest. But what if you could pull off one final massive game-breaking feat that defies the cycle of life and death itself? A feat that requires no magicka, no shout cooldown, and no items. What if you could raise an entire army with a single thought, creating a legion of the dead to watch over you while you finally close your eyes? We end our journey at the standing stone that offers the ultimate power trip, the ritual stone. We have walked the length and breadth of Skyrim tonight. We have turned iron into gold, shouted the clouds away, and turned the local wildlife into a personal militia. We have exploited the economy, the physics engine, and the AI. But as the moons rise high over the throat of the world, and the shadows grow long across the tundra, we find ourselves standing before a solitary stone marker east of Whiterun. It is etched with the symbol of a skull. It is the ritual stone, and it offers the final, most absolute useless power that breaks the game not by adding a 0 to a damage number, but by removing the limit on how many friends you can bring to the party. To the standard player, the Doomstones are a simple choice. You take the warrior, mage, or Thief Stone for leveling. Later, you take the Lord Stone for armor, or the Steed Stone for carry weight. The Ritual Stone is ignored. Its power is a daily power, usable only once every 24 in-game hours. It raises all dead around you to fight for you for roughly 60 seconds, or an hour of in-game time. Once a day, you ask? For 60 seconds? Useless. Why would you want a temporary army that vanishes just when you need it most? It seems like a gimmick, a party trick for a necromancer who ran out of magicka. But the useless label hides two specific mechanical interactions that turn this stone into the nuclear option of Skyrim. First, the level cap. Standard reanimation spells like Revenant or Dread Zombie have hard caps. They cannot raise high-level enemies. You cannot raise a giant. You cannot raise a mammoth. You cannot raise a Draugr Death Overlord. The Ritual Stone, however, has a level cap of 75. This covers almost every single entity in the vanilla game. It does not care how big the corpse is. If it is dead, and it has bones, it is yours. Second, and most importantly, the ash pile mechanic. We discussed earlier how normal necromancy turns bodies to ash when the spell expires, destroying the resource. The Ritual Stone does not ash the bodies. When the effect wears off, the zombies simply fall down. They are dead again. Their bodies remain intact. This means they can be raised again. Now we introduce the game-breaking artifact, the Ethereal Crown. Found at the end of the Lost to the Ages quest, Dawnguard DLC, this crown allows you to hold two standing stone powers simultaneously, but the exploit lies in the unequipped script. If you store the Ritual Stone power in the crown and you unequip the crown, the power is removed. If you re-equip the crown, the power is added back. The game engine, in its infinite wisdom, treats this added back power as a fresh instance. It resets the 24-hour cooldown. Do you see the loop? You walk into a bandit camp, you kill 5 bandits, you use the Ritual Stone, you have 5 zombies, you walk to the next camp, your 5 zombies kill 5 more bandits. The effect wears off. You now have 10 corpses on the ground. You take the crown off. You put the crown on. You use the Ritual Stone. You now have 10 zombies. This is the Necromancer's snowball. There is no limit to the number of minions the Ritual Stone can control. Standard spells limit you to 1 or 2. The Ritual Stone limits you only by the blast radius. If there are 100 bodies within range, you get 100 thralls. You can literally march across the map, depopulating entire holds, adding every wolf, bear, bandit, and guard to your procession. You become the leader of a parade of the dead. You're not playing Skyrim anymore. You're playing Pikmin, but the Pikmin are rotting corpses. The game engine will scream. The frame rate will drop. The physics engine will struggle to calculate the collision of 50 bodies moving through a narrow doorway. But this lag is not a bug. It is a testament to your power. You're breaking the reality of the simulation with the sheer weight of your retinue. Consider the giant army strategy. You visit the giant camps of the Whiterun Plains. You kill the giants, perhaps using the spray tap flames or the ash shell isolation methods we discussed. You raise them. You now have a squad of giants and mammoths. You fast travel to Solitude. When you arrive, your army spawns with you. You assault the castle dower not as a lone rebel, but as a general commanding a legion of siege monsters. The Imperial Legion stands no chance against a wall of reanimated mammoths. There is a profound lore implication here. The Ritual Stone is associated with the ritual constellation. In the firmament, it says, those under the ritual sign have a variety of abilities depending on the aspects of the moons and the divines. It implies a connection to the cycles of time. By using the Ethereal Crown, an artifact forged from Ethereum, a crystal found in the deepest Dwemer ruins and linked to raw magical potential, you are effectively hacking the cycle. You are short-circuiting the moons. You are denying the god Archay his due. The useless duration of the spell actually works in your favour for transport. If you need to enter a city, and the guards won't like your zombies, you just wait for the hour to pass. They fall down. You enter the city, do your business, come back out and wake them up. It is an on-demand army. You can park your horde outside the city gates like you're parking a car. There is also the boss cheese application. Kastag, the spectral frost giant king, is one of the hardest fights in the game. He hits like a freight train, but he is susceptible to the stagger of 100 simultaneous attacks. If you bring an army of 30 bandits into the Kastag arena, which requires some creative pathing or console commands, just mods to get them all in, or simply luring him out if possible, though usually this is for open world bosses like the Ebony Warrior, The sheer volume of attacks stun-locks him. He cannot move because he's being hit by 30 iron daggers every second. It is death by swarm. Visually, the Ritual Stone activation is one of the most satisfying moments in the game. You cast the power. A massive, expanding sphere of black and green energy ripples out from your character. It passes through rocks, trees, and walls. And then, the sound. A deep bass-heavy thrum followed by the collective groan of a dozen entities standing up at once. It is the sound of the grave opening. The pacifist application here is ironic. You can complete the game without killing anyone yourself. Your army does it all. You're simply the conductor. You walk into a room, snap your fingers, equip the crown, and the room clears itself. You can roleplay as a terrifying silent monk who is so holy, or unholy, that the dead refuse to let him be harmed. Fan theories often link the Ritual Stone to the ideal of the perfect necromancer sought by the Worm cult. Mannimarco sought to ascend to godhood. But the Dragonborn with the ethereal crown has achieved something more practical. Bureaucratic immunity to the laws of magic. The cooldowns that bind lesser mages do not apply to you. You have automated the process of death. And finally, let us consider the endgame scenario. You have beaten Alduin, you have defeated Miraak, you have saved the world. What is left? The Ritual Stone offers the ultimate sandbox. You can try to see how big the army can get before the game crashes. Can you gather the entire population of Whiterun, Riverwood and Falkreath into a single horde? It becomes a metagame of memory management. You are testing the limits of the Xbox 360, or the PlayStation architecture that the game was built on. It is the ultimate expression of the useless becoming godlike. A power that most players use once and forget becomes the tool that allows you to rewrite the demographics of Skyrim. You're not just the Dragonborn, you are the Gravelord. And so, the Legion falls silent. The massive, chaotic energy of the Ritual Stone fades, dissipating into the cool night air of the tundra. The bodies return to the earth, no longer tools of conquest, but simply part of the landscape. The ethereal crown is unequipped, placed gently into the bottom of a pack, its crystal pulsing with a faint rhythmic blue light, a heartbeat that is finally slowing down. The Dragonborn stands alone now. The exploits, the glitches, the grand designs of infinite power, they all recede. The Magicka bar refills, not because of a loop, but because there is no more need to cast. The stamina returns, not because of a perk, but because the running has stopped. The world of Skyrim, so often broken and bent to our will, settles back into its intended shape. The physics engine stops struggling. The AI returns to its patrols. The numbers stop flying. Find yourself a campfire. Maybe it's high on the slopes of the throat of the world, where the snow falls in slow, thick flakes that mute the sound of the wind. Maybe it's inside the warm, timbered walls of Lakeview Manor, where the fire in the hearth crackles with that familiar looping sound file we know so well. The sword is sheathed, the spell hands are lowered, the compass is clear of red dots. There is nothing left to grind tonight. There is no economy to crash, no dragon to stun lock, no mountain to climb. You have turned the useless into the essential, and in doing so, you have earned this rest. The servers of reality are winding down, the scripts are pausing, the screen fades from the sharp, vibrant colours of magic to a soft, comforting black. The quest log is empty, the save file is secure. Drift away from the keyboard, away from the controller. Let the music of the night, the violins, the wind, the distant call of a calmed wolf, carry you into the void. You are safe here. The game will wait for you. Sweet dreams.